City of Northglenn, Channel 8, keeping you informed of events in your community.
Call the study session meeting of October the 21st, 2019 to order. Joanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Escobar?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Leidy? Here. Councilmember Sowers? Here. Councilmember Rodriguez?
Here.
Councilmember Downing? Here. Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Whitman?
Here.
Councilmember Duran-Mullica? Here. Councilmember Wilford?
Here.
Want to do that now?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Escobar. First item for business this evening, I need to do a check-in to see who will be in attendance at the groundbreaking event that we're having next week for the Recreation Center. Groundbreaking, Amanda does need RSVPs, yourselves plus any guests you're bringing. So if I could just send this around, if you write your name and how many guests, that way we have an accurate count and have enough food for everybody. Thank you.
Can I ask a question about it? Is there going to be some sort of role or place for the Parks and Rec Advisory Board members?
I believe so, but I don't know. I haven't seen the exact agenda, so I'll follow up with an email. Let me talk with Amanda tomorrow.
All right, the first item on the agenda is the snow and ice control level service.
Sure. So we are bringing this item for discussion this evening based on feedback through the strategic planning process as well as the budget process for 2020. When we conducted the resident survey, I'm going to provide you with a couple of stats you might want to make note of. We did not measure the quality or importance of snow removal in 2006 or 2011 survey. We did measure it in this 2019 survey, and 62% of respondents rated the quality as such, while they rated the importance at 89% from a service perspective. So Kent's going to walk you through a very fundamental, this is what snow removal has looked like in the city of Northglenn. I think my ask of council tonight is, do we want to continue with our approach, or do we want to do more? And what does more potentially look like? And Ken can provide you guidance on what that might look like from a financial perspective as well as just a capacity staffing perspective. So that's the purpose of the discussion, and I'll turn it over to Ken.
Can you give the percentages again,
Sure.
please?
Yeah, so again, in 2006 and 2011, we did not measure quality or importance of snow removal in the resident survey. We did in 2019, and it was rated at 62%. And then the importance in 2019 was rated at 89%. So there's that variance between very important, but not highly rated. And it also showed up on the one chart in the resident survey. Let me just flip to it because it's a good visual of higher importance, lower quality, if you recall this chart in the survey on page 20.
Okay, I'm Kent Kisselman, your Public Works Director. The memo is kind of just a summary of what we're going to go through with the slideshow, so I'll just start with the slideshow. If you have any questions, open it up. Let's see, wrong button, that one. All right, so our snow and ice control on our roadways is necessary to ensure the safe transportation of people traveling in and through the city of Northglenn. We use general guidelines to manage snow and ice on our 241 lane miles of arterial collector and local streets. Lane miles are both directions, so if a road has 4 lanes, then that counts as a lane mile as well. Due to variable Colorado weather, each storm may require different strategies to attain our goals, and streets are cleared in order of priority, impacting the greatest number of drivers. And this map here, hopefully you can see, but it'll be on the board later, shows how we prioritize our roads. The residential streets of note are plowed when the accumulation exceeds 8 inches. And last year we cleared the residential streets 3 times, and the snows never got to 8 inches. So we went ahead on like 6.5, 7, made that call to go ahead and plow our residential streets, and our surrounding neighbors didn't plow. So the street priority, first priority are the mains. All lanes are plowed in each direction, and examples of those are 104th, 120th, Huron, and Washington. Those are our main streets. Second priority are the school zones and streets motorists typically use to reach the main streets. 1 lane is plowed in each direction. Again, examples of those: Clyde Court, Fox Run Parkway, and Pecos Street. The third priority are the residential streets that connect with first priority or second priority streets, and 1 lane, again, plowed in each direction. And the fourth priority are those residential streets with the lightest traffic. When the snow reaches 8 inches, we do a single lane through those residents. So this is our snow removal routes. And I don't know if that one's the best. So the first priority streets are the gold, and you can see how those go through our city and from end to end, and those are that is our again our first priority streets. Then we go to the blue dashed lines, and again those are plowed in each direction, and then on to the third priority. And of note on this, we made this modification on here just for clarification. So the yellow highlighted areas are Westminster and Thornton. So if you're in, say, Fox Run and you're jumping on 104th or up by Washington Street and you're getting on 104th, that section of road isn't our road to maintain. Same as you go north on York, and then when you cross the bridge on I-25, that section of 120th isn't ours. And then west of Huron is Westminster's. And then, of course, the big, thick blue line down the middle is CDOT, and they plow that. So our preparation. So each year our team attends the APWA, American Public Works Association Snow and Ice Conference for the updated and training and equipment. The first week of October, we meet with Parks and Rec staff because Parks is responsible for the sidewalks and our facilities. Public Works takes care of the roadway, and we outline, the safety standards, routes, responsibilities, and any changes to the procedure. The street supervisor ensures that we have all the materials on hand. That includes the magnesium chloride or Apex material, and filling our salt dome with the adequate amount of salt. And then the snow team begins preparing the equipment. Our teams are divided into 2 teams, red and blue. Each team consists of 7 to 8 drivers, and the teams alternate shifts throughout the season.
Is this a premix then? It just stays premixed?
Premix as in, I'm sorry.
As in the first week of October, you start this treatment and then you just save it until our first snowfall? Or?
We have equipment, and when we get to equipment, some of our trucks are equipped with the magnesium chloride. So there's a container on there, and we'll fill that up. Otherwise, we have a storage container at the facility, and it's stored in the container. Same with our salt. We try to buy the materials in June and July when it's cheap, and then we maximize that salt dome and fill it up, so that we're not paying for ice slicer in December when it's the highest cost. Yes.
And you may get to this at some point, but I'm curious, where does the 8 inches threshold
It's just historically been, there was no resolution or ordinance. It's just what other municipalities surrounding us have adopted that kind of a standard, and so it's just kind of been a in-play practice. I talked to Gene, and Gene said for at least the last 20 years. But there's no measurable there's nothing, I guess, scientific that we've done to say 8 inches is that line. And could we do different? We certainly could. But right now, that's what we normally go by. Yes.
What does Thornton and Westminster do? Is it 8 inches that
Yes.
they said? Well, okay.
Yes.
So just kind of like a
Yeah. Understanding that, yeah. And again, like the last year when it was close, but we knew it was a storm, we went ahead and we just said, let's hit those neighborhoods because that's a good thing to do, and let's just be on the safe side. Yes.
Clarifying question. So when we're talking about these priorities and we're talking about snow removal and the pre-treatment, when does the sand come in? Like, do we sand roads at all?
Sure. Do you want me to talk about? Yeah. Do you want?
Is it coming up? Do you talk about?
Kind
sand?
of, yeah, about how we do the snow event. So do you want to wait, or do you want me to go into it now?
That's fine.
Either way is fine. Okay. So our procedure is the street supervisor monitors the weather forecast. He confers with the operations manager on the storm, and he lets all city staff know that there's an upcoming event. The snow team supervisor ensures the team is on call and ready to mobilize, and determines if pre-treatment is necessary, and updates the operations manager as needed. So here may be a good place to talk about the pre-treatment. So the magnesium chloride or Apex material is only good at 32 degrees or below, so freezing and below, and only if it's dry. So those are the times that we can pre-treat. If, like, for example, the storm that happened last week, it rained. So we were unable to apply magnesium chloride prior to the event. And it was barely around freezing until later in the night. So that's not a typical application. Now, magnesium chloride isn't something that you would put on compacted snow either. It really is only for bare pavement and below freezing conditions. And it is the most expensive material we have or apply. So we try to limit that when we can. The operations manager keeps the public works director updated throughout the storm. The police officer, when they're out and about, they call dispatch when they say, okay, hey, it's starting to snow. They call dispatch, and then dispatch in turn calls the wastewater treatment or the water treatment plant, which is we have somebody there on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So somebody's always there answering the phone. The water treatment plant contacts the on-call employee, and then the on-call employee calls the streets supervisor, and then we determine what the storm's going to take. Does that is it just a couple trucks, or is it a maximum storm? And then we get into the level of storm that's needed to take care of the event. So the duration of event, we follow the priority schedule. The team communicates with each other via radio. So we divide the city into two areas, east and west of I-25. So there's an east team and there's a west team. So they're always communicating on both sides and then with each other, depending on how many are out. Plow drivers pull over, or when they go back to the yard, they get out, they inspect their vehicles, they check their wipers and their vehicles, make sure all the lights are working, and they do that throughout the duration of the storm. No team member can work more than 12 hours without approval of the operations manager. And in no time can they exceed 16 hours in one single work shift. The city retains an on-call contractor to assist with plowing in extreme circumstances. In my 6.5 years, we've never used that. So that contract has been kind of morphed into on-call snow and on-call pavement, streets, asphalt patching as well to maximize that contract. The equipment we have. So we have 6 tandem dump trucks with plows and sanders. Over the last few years, we've been trying to get dump trucks with stainless steel bodies, and so they don't rust out. We have those V boxes. That's the middle photo there at the top, and we put those on the trucks, and that's what they equipped them with in early October. Those slide right into the dump beds, and then the plows get affixed to the front, and then that truck is ready to go for the entire season. We have a skid steer Kubota with tracks. We have a single axle plow and sander. We have small trucks. We call those neighborhood vehicles. Those are what the supervisors typically drive around during each event, and every event has a supervisor, so they drive around and they're able to plow as well in their little trucks. After the storm, we have the Bobcat that we got last year, that piece of equipment that can slide and break up the ice in the areas. We have 2 backhoes and 2 front-end loaders with a plow and bucket. Our staff capacity, we have streets crew and water and wastewater distribution and collection crew is what the team is made up of. There's 2 teams, each consisting of 7 to 8 drivers who have been trained to operate the removal equipment. And additional staff with CDL certification may assist when needed, such as the sanitation team. They all are CDL drivers. There's some park members that are CDL drivers. So most MSW 2s and 3s in public works are CDL drivers. What does an event cost? So this is over the last 5 years, just an average. And so you can just kind of see the materials and the plowing costs per year. And then at the bottom is kind of the 5-year average. So in labor, we have an average of around 13 events a year. And that's, 1,000 hours of labor, 7,500 of vehicle miles, 1,000 gallons of Apex. And now here we have 3 different types of material. There's the slicer 80/20, which is more of it's an instant. It's the red material you'll see, so there's more salt in that, where it'll when we put that on the roads, that kind of just melts the snow the fastest. 50/50 mix is obviously 50% rock salt and 50% sand, 80% of the ice slicer, and then the rock salt mix is more sand and then a little bit of the salt. The different uses of those, when it starts to compact or pack down in the intersections or turn lanes, we use the slicer. So predominantly we switched over a couple years ago to predominantly the slicer, and that's the same or similar as Westminster and Thornton. Again, that material, once you apply it, you kind of you apply it with the sander, and then you drive around and you plow off, and you give that material time to work, and then it begins to melt that. And then when you come back the second time, then you can plow that away. The rock salt and slicer 50/50 and 80/20 mixes, those are more for after the storm, and when you're just trying to get some grip, and it's a cheaper or less expensive material, and so we can use more of that. So a lot of times around the school areas in the mornings, we'll go and we'll put that material around there because it'll grip and it'll stay on top of the surface if there's just a little bit of ice. But typically when it's snow-packed, we'll use the ice slicer. You can see the labor for per year, the materials that we use, and the total cost. So summing it all up, you kind of have about $7,500 a storm event. Now, if all things were equal, if all storms were the same, you'd spend about 80 hours of labor, you'd plow about 600 miles of road, you'd use about 83 gallons of Apex, and about 100 tons of material, sand, salt, mixture, so that's if every storm was the same, which every storm is different, so. So in 2020, what are the next steps that we've tried to do a little bit different? We're developing a snow operations we'd like to develop a snow operations educational video now that we have our new communications director, and post that, kind of what do we do, what is an event, here's kind of our equipment, what can that do. We proactively monitor the CDOT and Colorado State Patrol websites when the snows are predicted. We already have one predicted for Wednesday night, so we're already looking ahead on that. And then we started this last week with the snowstorm. We proactively just sent out a truck, kind of the on-call guy, with one of the trucks because we know the storm was coming, and instead of waiting for dispatch or police to say, hey, it's snowing, we already know it was snowing or going to snow, so we just had that guy go out, and one on the east side, one on the west side, and so he was readily available to call in the rest of the team when the storm was coming. And then again, we debrief after each storm event. The teams get together and we say, what did we do? What can we improve? What can we do better? What went well? What went wrong? All those things. And that is the presentation for level of service snow and ice. So I will.
Maybe go back to the.
I'm going back to the map.
Yeah.
I'm pushing buttons.
Can I ask a quick question?
Can.
Again, first of all, I think the city of Northglenn does a great job with snow removal. That could be because I live in the middle of Irma and Claude. But what is going to happen, like on Claude, since we have those speed humps that we put in there? Do those have to be brought up before the snow starts hitting, or they'll be fine going with the plows?
Yeah. So when the plow operators come up to a speed hump, then they lift their plow up and then they go over it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and when we make those permanent, then they'll be able to plow right over those as well. So, typically what they do is they'll probably just hit the lever. I'm calling it a lever because I forgot the word, but and it'll spit sand or salt out over those. So
Over the top, and
yeah.
then the plow will come back down.
Temporary
Yeah.
ones.
Okay. Thank you. But again, I think you do a great job.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yes?
So a couple questions. On the last slide, it says that you debrief each storm. Would you be willing to share some of those things that have come up with your team the last couple storms? Like what types of things do they talk about in that debrief?
Well, sometimes they talk about. Sometimes it's just equipment. Hey, this blade, was not functioning, so we need to get that into fleet. What happened with the equipment? What went wrong? Is there anything that we need to do and upgrade our equipment? I'm trying to think back. I didn't attend last week's storm debrief, so I'm trying to recall from last year. They just go over, did we have enough people? How did it go? How long were the shifts? There's nothing really specific. It's just, they just get together and talk about the team and make sure that, that we covered everything. We have a map. It's not on here, but Gene, the street supervisor, who's been here a long time, has developed a map where we know where the icy areas are. So even after the storm, and it begins to thaw, and it'll begin to melt and go into those neighborhoods, mostly on the north face, he knows that he'll need to get out there and do ice mitigation. So, it's talking about those types of issues.
Have we ever put storm events, as you call them, and traffic events, have we ever put the data together? Like how many accidents our city has per event?
I don't think we have. We could certainly do that exercise, take a couple storm events, probably from last year, and we can look and have PD pull accident data and see what it tells us. But we don't do that currently. So, we'll talk about tying in accident data when we talk about traffic calming, but that's a good suggestion.
Well, and I've shared this with you before. One of my personal concerns is because I keep getting hit during these events. So some of these accidents are mine. I'm not hitting other people, but I've been hit 5 times in the last 3 years, and it's really frustrating. So there's that personal piece, but then when I look at the data and that 62% rating, if we don't have more specific feedback on why, I know why I get frustrated, and then also my perception, because I drive in and out of the city multiple times, and just the visible difference between our roads and other cities. That's my concern. So if I was taking that survey, that would be my perspective. So I don't know what other residents, what their background is and why they would rate it that way. But thinking about improvement ideas, because this is a really solid plan. It's very tight, it's very clear. Couple things I do wonder is if we could bump up priority in school zones and move them up to a different priority. That might be an action step that would help residents and families feel safer. I don't know that you have to do that. I'm just trying to think about what ideas might make sense. I don't know. I mean, I like the action steps you have. The other one that I could think about, and it's just happened a couple of times where I feel like we start later than other people. We're not anticipating that storm just right. And so this proactive measure, I think is a great idea. I just don't know, were there any other ideas that came from your team about how to increase that perception?
Yeah, I think it was just getting out earlier and just being a little bit, having the guys on call, because, people don't live, not everybody lives here in the city. So by the time, dispatch or the police officer calls dispatch and dispatch calls the water plant and the water plant calls the on-call guy, then, it's 30 minutes. And then to get the entire team in, that's 60 minutes. So, depending on the severity of the storm, that can be, an hour of lost time. So I think this year just, getting out there earlier and making sure, even if it does cost a little bit on the back end to have, 2 guys on overtime. If they're on call, they're getting paid regardless, having them out there driving around doesn't seem like that big of a leap to get out there. And with respect to schools, even though they may not be the priority, they're a priority 2 when during the event, they're the first priority the next day. So after, we ensure that, if the snow had stopped like at 10 o'clock in the evening, the guys are coming in at 4 or 5 in the morning and they're hitting every single school with ice slicer or, the Apex material if applicable, or the rock salt or whatever, so that we do hit the schools each morning, regardless if they're out there. So,
well, and to your credit, we've had quite a few bizarre timed storms. Like, they've just hit us at weird times of day and been really hard to manage statewide. So I understand that too. I don't know. Do you have other ideas on how to?
It all comes down to level of service. I know it's hard sometimes when we're communicating first priority versus second priority versus third. You naturally think ABC, third priority being the last priority, not as important. So there might be a way maybe we tweak the language we use, because even to what Kent just shared, schools are a priority, so we might want to update our map so we better visually communicate that they are a priority. And promote that when we have the ability to plow all streets, we will plow all streets. And that's really a conversation where Kent calls me or sends me a text message and says, this is what we're doing. And that's really the process about how it happens, if we have the resources and everything. So, that 8-inch, it's not in a resolution, it's not in an ordinance. You could change that standard if you'd like. Kent mentioned it's pretty consistent with other communities. But I think it's a guide, and so treating each storm on a case-by-case basis and really making sure staff is being intentional about, okay, we need to do this, regardless of that 8-inch standard, I think is probably, what we really need to emphasize moving forward. And then working with the other neighboring jurisdictions, because that huge stretch of 104th, you would naturally think this is Northglenn. But, we all know that it invisible boundaries, and so residents often think, oh, I'm in Northglenn, this road's in Northglenn, but they don't understand right-of-way distinctions, nor should they. So,
Can I ask just a quick question? Meredith, your 5 accidents, they were all in Northglenn?
Uh-huh.
Or there is like
Actually, one was in like,
is there like a succinct area that you've had your accidents in that we should focus on?
well, I'm looking, one was Fox Run. And I think that's why I was asking about sand, because it's more ice. And then 104th, my question about right-of-way, because my understanding, traffic-wise, is that westbound is Northglenn and eastbound is Thornton.
Right, but we have an IGA with
Okay.
both Thornton and Westminster that says who maintains signals or who does maintenance or who does the plowing. So that's the IGA that we have. So we share 120th and 104th with Thornton. And as you can see, we plow the majority of 120th in all lanes, both directions. And then Thornton plows the majority of 104th, both lanes, all directions. It just wouldn't make sense for one jurisdiction to plow eastbound and one to plow westbound when you're making loops around the city.
I think we got the easier end of that deal, because the 104th, that Irma dip, and up on that hill is out of control. And so if that's something that we need to talk to Thornton about, improving their service there, because that's frightful. And that whole community in Fox Run is, that's an artery to get out. And that is really, really intense during snow. And so 120th is just flat. There's no hill. So it may just be something to dig in and talk to. To your point, Becky, I've got my own personal issues and concerns about it.
No, I'm just wondering if there's an area that we should say that this is.
Well, I'm just looking, I wonder what the residents are thinking. I think some of it can be addressed through communication and having a better understanding about what the plan is, but then thinking about improving it, because this is such a safety issue. I mean, I think more and more drivers get very nervous on the road when it snows, and accidents or not, it's a safety issue. And so how do we help our residents feel comfortable, especially when they are listing it as an important factor? So I'm just wondering what other ideas we have.
I have a quick question. So why or how is it that we came to these specific routes, especially the third priority? So I'm seeing that there are some neighborhoods, one of them is being mine off of like 112th and Huron, that little pocket right there. There's a lot of red dots in there. And to be honest, we're not a main little section at all. Like, people get stuck in our neighborhood all the time because they can't figure out how to get out. I appreciate that my road gets plowed all the time, but I am just kind of curious, why is it that these third priority roads and specifically were, established? Because I'm seeing large parts of the city where there's not any red at all. So I'm kind of curious how you guys came about that, and do we reevaluate that at all in any particular way?
I haven't reevaluated yet this year, but the third priority streets are the ones that connect to the first priority streets or the second priority roads. So it's kind of just building that network out. So we focus on the main ones to get the emergency vehicles and the most motorists through the city with the mains. Then we go to those second priority streets that again carry the so if I had to, and I guess I'm not going to guess, if I put average daily traffic over this map, I would probably guarantee that the average daily traffic is heavier on these roads in succession. So You're talking about the mains carry the most vehicles, the collectors, the second, the third priority, or, and on down onto residential, so with the amount of traffic on each road. And we can do that exercise if you
Yeah,
like.
well, one thing I do hear is, I have heard comments, as Meredith is saying, that, Northglenn streets are just generally worse. I don't know if that's even constructive or if it's even true. But I have heard that, why doesn't the city ever plow my street? And I could see why maybe your street is never plowed, because there's lots of streets in here that aren't red. So, and I get it, we have, resources we're trying to prioritize. So, I don't know, I just feel like it might be helpful to kind of talk about that, and maybe that goes down to the quality of, that question of, the city never plows my street, type thing, and that's why they feel like they're not getting any type of services. It's just a question, an observation I was just making from that, so.
Sure, but even though that resident or somebody says that they never plow their street, that's not a true statement, because even last year we plowed them 3 times. So, we need to keep that in mind, that we have plowed or do plow every street in the city at various times or during that event. So, similar to street sweeping, we street sweep every single street every year twice. So if somebody says that they don't plow your road or my road never gets plowed, then that's just not correct.
Perception if they come by late in the morning or late at night, because then it's snowed again, and you can't tell that it was plowed.
And it is. I mean, when you get 6 or 8 inches of snow and you come through with one pass, and it's snowing very heavy, that one trip down doesn't do a lot, but it does help.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, Ken. So when you mentioned that the city had plowed, I guess the city 3 times last year, and you mentioned that it wasn't at the 8-inch standard. What level of accumulation was it?
I think they were around 6 or 7, but the way I looked at it was, I think there was the 3 times last year that we made that call where it was all coming at once. So again, once an event starts, that's a snow event. So that if that event lasts for 2 days of snow and you get, say, 3 inches on one day and 4 inches or 5 inches the next, then that equals 8 inches. But if we're getting a big snowstorm at one time and it's all dumping, and you're getting that 6-inch level and we're getting streets cleared, then I think those were the situations where we said, hey, let's go ahead and get through those neighborhoods and clear those roads, because this is going to be the majority of the storm event.
And then do we know the average accumulation per weather event in the last year?
I do not.
Okay, because I was seeing that we had like 17 weather events, but those 17 weather events we may or may not have taken any action on. Is that
No,
correct?
if it's listed, an event is an event. So we have already had one event this year.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And then when you mentioned that you plowed through the city, is this every single street, or is this just the areas that were blue, red, and gold?
So again, during an event, we plow in priority. So when we get to, are you asking about the 8-inch line?
So you mentioned that there were 3 instances in which she plowed everywhere in the city, and I'm just trying to understand, is that
Those would be the 8-inch.
priority, or everywhere that's like every street? Does that
Did
make
you
sense?
do, so like last year when you guys plowed 3 times, you plowed every street. So you did the priority streets.
Yes, in priority.
And then went through and did all the other streets. So like when I used to live in Fox Run, I used to live off of York Street, and when you look at the map, York Street will never get plowed, and it did get plowed last year during those events when we had that heavy accumulation. I can't remember what month it was, but normally, second priority when you look at Fox Run Parkway, that's a second priority, but then you have all those other streets in there, and that's what Kent's saying is drivers will go ahead and plow plow those streets
Every single street.
After, yeah.
after the
all the
priority,
events.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
I
during
wanna
that,
make sure that I'm
that
understanding
8
that
inches or whatever event.
And then my question about that is let me back up a chair. I've had a couple of residents who've expressed that they really appreciate having the streets plowed, but some of our more senior residents have, at least to me, have expressed a frustration that when we are plowing the streets, that the snow is being pushed right into their driveway, and then they don't have, like, it's physically really difficult for them to then be able to move that snow that's been pushed in their driveway so they can get their vehicle out. Is there anything we can do to try and alleviate some of that?
Yeah, a lot of times they'll just call, I mean, that's just, we don't have anywhere to put it. So, I mean, it has to plow one direction or the other. And so what we try to do, the drivers try to plow it to the south, just because that's where the sun's gonna come up and hit it first. So when they plow, they turn their blade that direction and they try to, plow it if it's a one lane, like a residential street. But yeah, we, sometimes we'll get the calls and say, hey, I just finished shoveling off my walk, because that's a municipal code thing that they have to clear their walk within 24 hours. And the drivers went by and we just pushed snow back up and I can't back out my car. And, so usually we try to go out and break that up and move that. But when they're into the event, that's not typically something that, they stop and do. I mean, I don't know how much time that would take. But that's just an unfortunate consequence of plowing snow.
But what I'm hearing is that if a resident has a particular issue or physically isn't able to remove the snow that's being pushed into their driveway, that they can call the city and get assistance.
And we can better promote that.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Yeah, after the snow stops and after the event is kind of slowed down, I mean, there's still like sometimes 2 or 3 days worth of work to do. And so that goes back to breaking up the ice. They call it mopping up or slushing. And so the trucks go out and they'll push that slush around and get it out of the curb line. So then the water can, when it melts, it can get into the storm system. And those are the times typically when the snow becomes hard and hard to move, where we get those calls, and then we have time that we can go out with various crews of those neighborhood vehicles and punch those people through.
So thinking about, I had 2 things. One is like a less than 8 inches, say we have like a 3-inch storm, 3-4. The plowing, I just want to be clear, the plowing comes with the sand and the de-icing stuff, right? Like that's a package process.
Yeah, every truck that we have has a V-box on it with sand. So everybody leaves the yard with sand. Not all of our vehicles have the magnesium chloride equipped on them. The last 2 vehicles we purchased over the last 2 years do have that capability. So I believe we have 3 trucks in total that carry the Apex. I can confirm that if you'd like. But
Well, I was thinking, what's that other thing, the 50/50 stuff?
that's just a variation of the mix. So when they go to the sand dome, they load it up with the loader and put it in there. So they'll either put in the 80/20, the ice slicer, or they'll put in the rock salt, or they'll put in the other mix, depending on what it is.
So it looks like on the chart, we haven't used those other 2 in the last 2 years. It looks like we're only using the 50/50.
Yeah, because last year I wanted to start saving some money on some of these events when we get to, it started out in 14, 16, 17. They were using the 80/20 mix, which was more sand, less salt, and it just wasn't effective. So over the last few years, we've switched to the 80/20 mix, where we use more of the ice slicer. That's the pure mix.
According to this chart, we're using a 50/50.
Oh, the 50.
Yeah, the
50/50.
It seems like we're using a 50/50 exclusively last year.
I
The
hope
other
I didn't
3
make an
options.
error on that. I'll double check that, but I know that we're using the ice slicer the most.
Okay. I don't know which one's
The
which on
80/20?
this chart.
I'll check. I thought it was 80/20, but I will check on that and get that information
That's
to you.
okay. I was just trying to envision, so if there's like a 3-inch storm, we're still running this priority list. Because the ice piece is that piece, right? Snow is snow, we gotta get it out of the way, but the ice is the piece that's left. And so does an event, as you started to mention, that cleanup process, how long, like, does an event take? 2 days, 3 days?
It just varies on the storm. So
Okay.
like last week, when it did snow on Wednesday night it started snowing. By Friday AM, it was all cleaned up. And then if we have put material out on the road, salt or sand, then that's typically when we send out the street sweepers to go start cleaning that up.
So Heather, this question may be for you, but I know through strategic planning and the budget process, talking about FTE and such, that phrase level of service keeps coming up. To increase our level of service and to be responsive to the survey, can we add red lines? Do we create green lines? How can we kind of beef up what we currently have?
If council wants to see quicker response, potentially with all streets plowed, I would ask that Kent and I have time to do the budget exercise and figure out how that equates to X number of additional FTE and trucks, and then bring that back to you. So, cities have different levels of service. When I worked for the city of Greenwood Village, snow removal was a huge priority, and because their location within the Denver Technological Center, all of those areas plus residential streets, I believe, at the time that I worked for them, they were a priority. So it just really depends on, we would have to do the exercise and see how to capture these other streets that normally aren't part of that 3-tier priority system. And so we just need some time to do that and then put the budget and the people to it if we need additional people, or if we can address it with, based on feedback tonight, figure that out, maybe do some piloted approach for 2020. And then if we need additional FTE for 2021, that's one option, or we can just go ahead and we can do the exercise and say, okay, to get every street, every storm at X threshold.
Well, and I'm not even saying that. I mean, that's going from here to way over here, which is great. But if there was a middle ground of, if we added
what that middle ground is.
more streets.
We only have so many trucks, so I mean, the first thing is going to be, getting more trucks out. And so we need more trucks, more plows, more V-boxes, maybe a bigger sand dome. We need more material.
I think I
We
would
need
like
people
to
to
see
drive those
what we're doing
vehicles.
now. You know what I mean? If we could get something that says, we're getting this amount of roads done, like 15% or 50%, 15%, 25% in this amount of time. Because I don't even think we know that we have a true problem where we need to hire people and, buy new trucks and stuff. I don't know if we have that problem just looking at what we've seen tonight. I don't see that. So I think that from my perspective, we need to know more timing specifics, more statistics around it, Ken.
Well, again, in one of the first slides, the first slide said that every storm is unique. So
Right, I mean, there's no way to know.
I mean, when the snow starts blowing, I mean, that becomes, a blizzard condition, and then there's only so much the drivers can do. They can't, operate in a blizzard, so we have to, do what we can do, so.
I agree with you, but I also agree with Meredith. The only thing is that I just don't want to buy new trucks and stuff and have them sit around some days, some months, some years, and then maybe be used moving forward,
Well,
I like our approach of, getting out there ahead of the storm and monitoring it and getting the crews called in earlier this year. So, I think we have a good plan. We have a great team, a lot of guys have been here for a lot of years. So, they know the routes that they do and they make their way. And, again, we can look at, we have, the data. We can start looking at the traffic, and maybe there are some other streets on here that have increased in traffic based over the last few years that we need to add into this list. So we'll have to do that kind of an overlay and then bring that back and say, hey, these are where these the traffic is increased on these. We recommend adding those streets in for priority, and can certainly look at that.
Well, I think we need to do something. I think doing nothing is not being responsive to the city. If it ended up in that quadrant, it's something that we need to be responsive to, and getting ahead of it is helpful, but I don't think that's really, I think we need to look. It kind of falls under that we've always done it this way category. I think it might be good to look and try something different, try something new.
I think we have a lot of feedback, so I'll just recap and then add any additional that I didn't capture. We're gonna look at accident data in relationship to our priority streets. We're going to look at increased daily traffic and see if there's any shifts that need to happen with our current prioritization of streets. Do a better job at communicating school zones being a priority, so probably add a different color with the roadways around school zones. Even though they're a second priority, they're really a priority, so I think we can communicate that better. Overall communication of our process and system, and then how residents can contact us if they have situations where snow gets plowed onto their sidewalk or into their driveway. And then we'll have more conversation at the staff level just about what would that range look like, because as Kent said, it'll take drivers and plows. But I think as we move into 2020, we can look at each storm differently through the lens of this conversation and see if we see anything different that we can take away and then build on and make tweaks as we go along and see if, so whatever the events look like in this coming year, are they going to be 6-inch events, 10-inch events? Who knows? But treat each storm on its own and try to be strategic about what we're doing and making sure that we reinforce that safety is a priority. Snow removal is really a core service in my mind. So I think we do need to do a better job communicating that to residents. Really, all of the items on tonight's study session really fall within that core service category. So did I capture everything? Were there?
The only piece is to maybe talk to Thornton.
Oh yes, Thornton. I have that written down. Talk with Thornton.
Anybody else? I just have a couple of comments. You mentioned the sun coming up on the south side more than not. On 115th and Melody, as an example, there's a 2-story house. The snow is pushed to the south, and there's never any sun there. All the sun is in the north. So on 98th and Croak, I think is the same kind of situation. So can we instruct our drivers to be a little more proactive, to we kind of see the problem, instead of putting it like you always do it, move it where more sun is, so it can, melt quicker. The other item was the uphill, and I realized when you live on a street that has a hill, you can either go down the hill or you can go up the hill. I don't know why people choose to go up the hill when it's snowing, but they do, and that was a common complaint, particularly in, just north of 104th, Eura, Cuevas, Livingston, all of those. It's a lot of hill, and yet they try to get up this hill, and the residents are telling me, I got to go get this guy off. I spent my whole day pushing people up the hill. Well, I know they could have gone down the hill, they could have got around it. But can we set somewhat a priority where there is a hilly street to, maybe increase the focus just a little so that we eliminate some of those problems?
Yeah, I know we have those priorities. So when they go out, it's the turn pockets, it's the stopping at the intersections, it's hills. They do those priorities, but we'll double check those priorities and make sure that we're up to date on those.
Anything else? No? Thank you, Kent. And we're still on the on the front line. Item B is the 2019 pavement condition assessment. City Manager Guy, would you introduce the item, please?
Yes. So Ken's gonna walk us through the PCI, as we call it, and we're gonna need to come back to council based on the initial financial figures, what it's gonna cost to get up to the level that we wanna be at, even if we were to stay with our 70-point system that we strive to be at today. We'll need to come back with you with a more specific financial strategy on how to meet that. But I wanted to start out with going back to the resident survey. Street repair and maintenance was a question. And in 2006, the quality was rated at 49%. 2011, it was rated at 50%. 2019, it was rated at 46%. And the importance is 95%. So here in core service, this is a service that's really important to our residents. So what I would say, Ken's got a lot of information to share with council this evening. Some of it gets very technical and there's a lot of graphs and different things. So just let us know when you have questions. And like I said, we're not gonna have an ultimate solution tonight, but we'll need to bring back, I wanna get general consensus on where you wanna head, and then we'll bring back a financial strategy on how to get there.
I'm still here. Okay, so again, your memo just kind of summarizes everything that we'll go through in the slides. So we'll go through the slides. This is the 2019 Pavement Condition Index. The city is responsible to maintain an average PCI, again, Pavement Condition Index of 70 by resolution. That resolution was in 2006. The PCI methodology is ASTM, American Standard, gosh darn it, I forgot. It's testing materials. So it's a material testing standard, and that's the number. We conduct the PCI every 3 years. The last, in 16 and 19, we contracted with IMS Infrastructure. Is it not what? Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just.
To do the 2016 and 2019 PCI by using laser technology. That's kind of the simplest term. Prior to that, in 2013, we did it by hand. The 2016 PCI ranking was 59, and we have the next PCI scheduled for 2022. These are the recommended treatments based on the various levels of the pavement condition range. So you see it ranges from excellent all the way down to very poor, 85 to 100, 70 to 75, you can read those. And then the recommended treatment for each one of those grades. So what you will notice is everything below a 60 will require a mill and an overlay. There's no more quote unquote saving the street after it's reached the level of 60. 60 and above, we can do an edge mill or a chip seal or a slurry seal or crack sealing, and those are what we want to do to our newly paved roads to maintain those on into the future.
Okay, can you just walk through what a full with mill and overlay looks like for the benefit of residents watching?
Sure. Do you want me to go through all the treatments? Anyone? Sure. So crack sealing is, we can do that internally. We have a crack sealing machine, and that's kind of the rubberized material you see on your street. If you drive down a street and it looks like it's just been blasted with black goo all over, that's the crack sealing, and we do that in-house, and we've also externally contracted that out. A micro surface or a chip seal is kind of what I spoke of, a slurry seal or a chip. A chip seal is very fine asphalt particles, and a slurry seal is kind of just the tar, that we can drag across and make it, it just kind of gives it a big black coating all over the entire street. An edge mill and a thin overlay or chip seal. So an edge mill, when we say that, that means when you drive along the gutter and you just edge that, you just take the asphalt down an inch or an inch and a half or 2 inches just along that first 2 or 4 feet, and then you kind of overlay the entire road. So that's when you get the buildup on layers in the middle. And so at some point you can only overlay the street so many times before you have to reconstruct the entire thing. But you can do the edge mill. Again, you want those gutter, the road, the asphalt to meet the gutter apron so that the flow of moisture can go into the gutter pan and into the storm system. Then a full width mill is, again, just exactly what it sounds like. You're going to mill everything on that street and then overlay that entire section. When you get to the poor condition, and we in the city of Northglenn do not have any very poor roads. When you get to the poor, that's going to be, again, that thick mill, and some of our roads in residential areas are only 2.5 inches to begin with. So when you mill that out, you're kind of already into that subgrade, and then sometimes that subgrade is poor and you need to, reconstruct that subgrade. I don't know, maybe several of you are around. 99th would be an example that we completed last year of a total reconstruction. I mean, we dug that road out, 4 feet deep, and brought in new material and stuff because it was so bad.
What did we do on Phillips?
Phillips this year, mill, and all the streets this year were mill and overlay.
Mill and overlay. Okay.
Full mill and overlay. Yes.
So when you do a mill and an overlay, like if a road is like at a 70 PCI, does then it like stay at a 70 PCI because you did the mill and overlay, or does it bump it back up to like excellent condition?
Yeah. If we do any kind of treatment on that, so if we do, like, if we have a very good street, well, let's start from the top. If we have an excellent street that we just paved 2 years ago, we want to go out and that, once it's done paved, it's 100. But after a year, it's probably a 95. And then the next year, maybe it's a 90. And after 2 years, after the warranty is expired, if we don't have any warranty work, what we try to do is get out there and crack seal it, and then that pushes it back up to a 95. So when we can go in and do these treatments, you want to do crack sealing typically anywhere from 2 to 4 years after the road has been resurfaced. A slurry seal or a chip seal can prolong the life of a street 7 to 12 years, depending on that treatment. So again, once it's resurfaced, then the grade gets regraded into a new category.
So you have to do both, and that's part of what we're gonna get into, where we're backlogged or behind on roadway maintenance, and like what we're doing this year and moving forward. It's gotta be both.
All right.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. It's got to be both.
So-
You're saying it's got to always be.
So you're gonna see the spectrum of the condition of our streets. So when you look at this map, each has a different color based on the rating system. So there's things that we need to be doing every year to our excellent, very good roadways, because eventually they're gonna deteriorate over time. So it's not just the fair marginal streets that we need to focus attention. We've got to balance our resources and look at the whole picture.
Preventative maintenance, that is what you're saying.
Yep.
So this is a snapshot of our roads, and again, they're divided into two groups: the collectors and the arterial, or the collectors and the locals, and the arterials. And again, the arterials are, the mains, kind of like our priority 1 streets from the previous discussion.
Can you give a couple examples?
So an arterial would be Huron, Washington, 120th, 104th. Those are the arterials. And then everything else is collector and local. So our collectors and locals, currently the rating is a 60, and the arterials rated a 63. The percent of excellence is 6.9 and 16.5, and the backlog is 5.5 and 9.8. And then below, backlog is defined as the percentage of streets with a pavement condition index of 40 or less. and the percent of excellence is under 15%, or percent of excellence under 15% indicates we may be struggling to properly fund our roadway network. And generally, a very healthy agency will have less than 10% backlog, and if backlog reaches 20%, it'll become very costly. So this is our roads. This is a little, hard to, it's not hard to read, but, there's a lot of numbers here. So you can see the various categories ranging, again, from excellent down to very poor. And you can see that the miles for the collectors and the locals, and then the miles of the arterials, and then the percentage of those of each one. So we have 6.7% in the excellent category and very good, and you can see that the most of the collectors and locals is in that fair to marginal category. That's where the most roads are. And again, just of note, I'm going to flip up here. So that's approximately 54 miles of road that's 60 and below. So when we spoke earlier about lane miles, which was like 241, actual miles of road we have is around 106. So when you say 54 miles of our roads are 60 and below, that means 60, again, we mentioned earlier that those are total reconstructions or full mill and overlays. Those aren't something we can fix anymore. So as we move forward, I think the next slide is going to kind of bring this home. Oh, no, these are the maps. Oh, well, yeah, that's awful. I'm sorry.
Why don't
So-
you kind of walk through and bring this closer for council to see?
All right, so we have two. So we have on here all the ratings on here, and as you can see, the way each, it's not just rated on each road. So as you think about a road that you live on and you drive from block to block, gets a rating. So I'll just pick one I can see here quickly. What's this one?
What's the rating on Bacon?
So this is 104th. So from Zuni to, why I can't even read that. Well, it goes from like 51 and 57 and 52 and 55. And so each segment or each block is rated on the pavement condition index scale. It's not, whereas you take an entire stretch of a roadway and you say that's the average to determine what it is. Again, each block is broken out. So that's why there's so many dots on here that have a rating. And then what we try to do, or what we have done, and you'll see in another board, is we've looked at those segments and said, okay, there's a 40, there's a 50, and there's a 30, and that's a roadway that we think we should do and bring that up to a 95. So again, you can see the various colors and how we've tried to do this in the past. Our residential street program, we try to balance this between the wards. Is that the best system? I'm not sure, but that's what we've been doing.
Wait, can you say that again? You've been trying to balance the road work we've done.
So we try to balance it in each ward, so each ward gets a fair amount of road work each year. And I think last year was kind of the first time we tried to unbalance it, and I think Brooke and I, we had a study session, we discussed some of that about maybe transitioning, because we have, the Connect Northglenn and other priorities, not just a segment of school. So how do those things, again, this kind of ties in all the things we've spoke about over the last year, where we built that criteria of why we do something. How does it affect the community? How many folks does it affect or impact? Is it by a school? And those types of things.
So down here?
Yeah. I know, this is,
That's all residential.
This is just the
collector,
residential
local
and the
collector.
collectors.
Do you want to grab the?
I can grab the
main
arterial one. Yes.
Before you go away, Marcy?
Yeah, real quick, and I might have misunderstood you, but I thought you said we didn't have any poor roads.
Very cool.
Very poor.
Very poor, got it.
We have poor.
Right.
Here's the same.
Can I just clarify, is it looks like the board, that's our bottom rating, it looks like there are only 2 areas that have the poorest roads, and that's Huron Street and 104th in Ward 4.
And these are the arterials, so you'll see,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Oh, yeah, and that's the map that I handed out earlier, so the map that was in your packet was just another collector local, so the handout is the arterial road.
But I'm seeing that.
And you're correct.
Street and 104th are the worst in the city.
Yes. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody.
Well, especially with, after Thornton redid their side of the road to the south, and you can really, your car feels deep breath after that Northglenn road, it's like, oh, and then it gets to Thornton. It's nice and smooth.
So again, you can kind of see how we've, how these rated out. And the arterials and the collectors and locals are rated, so the arterials and then the collectors and locals are rated separately based on the pavement condition index. We separate those two. So I think one was 63 and one was 60. We don't combine those. We can come back to these.
So going back to the strategy, are we gonna take care of the orange and yellow?
That's next.
Can I
Oh.
ask a quick question?
Yes.
Just about this data that you have here. So I think these maps are fantastic. They are horrible to read.
I know.
Is there a
It's-
better, do you guys have something like on the website that's better, where you have like the PCI information for every road, like on like an ESRI type platform where people could like interact with it and zoom in and really get a good sense of that data? Just curious.
We could, and that's maybe a discussion we need to have, because if you publish that information, then somebody will say, well, my road's a 42 and you're paving a road that's a 49. Why are you doing that?
Well,
Now,
I think
we
it's
can-
important that we're transparent though, about why are we deciding to pave some roads over
And
others?
that's right.
And so if it's just, and I like what you and Brooke were saying earlier, is it just PCI rating, or are we considering other things as well? It's like, how many people ride this? So like, I think it's important that we have a really good, solid criteria that we then apply continuously, and we're very transparent about how it happens. I think that's the best thing that we can do to provide people with the information that they need.
Yeah, and I think we spoke about this, earlier in the year when I kind of took over. We talked about building not only just a 2-year plan, but a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan. So we had to wait until we got this 2019 data, and we're still in that process. I mean, we really rammed this stuff together. I mean, we just got the final report last week. So, being able to tell what happened from 2016 to 2019 and look at that degradation and see how the roads are failing and how fast they're failing, that's information that we need to go back and look at and see. So we have a lot more work to do and information, and we want to put that out there, and we want to be transparent and publish that information. Right now, we're just not in that position to do that. We can certainly make these maps available. It just, at this point, I don't believe tells the entire story.
Can you provide to us what the criteria was before? Why we went this way?
Why?
On any given street, why?
Oh, the history of why it was picked at 70 in 2006?
Well, not 70 in 2006. I mean, why did we pick I know why we did Phillip this year, okay? I'll be honest with you. But what made Phillips more important than Pecos or Huron? Because I was naive to what those streets look like, I'm gonna tell you, but I'm not naive anymore. I mean, what made my Phillips more important than those 2 long streets?
I don't know, so I have to
Okay.
lean on.
Yeah, I think, the 115th and Phillips we did area in that work over the last few years. So again, when we can complete an area, we want to do that. And so I think that kind of completed some of the work that we've done over the last few years in that Claude Court area in that ward. Again, I think, we ended up trying to balance again some of that ward work between the wards, instead of just saying, okay, this is kind of the worst area in the city and it impacts the most people, and this is where we should focus our efforts.
I think with the discussion tonight, there's an opportunity to look at what council direction we've been given from the past and update this, do a new resolution with specific criteria tied to the PCI index and what you want to see as first priority, second priority. And really, Kent talked about having a 5 to 10 year plan. We've got to build that financial strategy. So in a couple slides ahead, he's going to break down what we need to do on an annual basis for local collectors and then arterials, and I've got to figure out how we pay for it. But I think from my perspective as manager, what I'd like to see is us tie that 5-year commitment to some type of resolution or formal council action. So that way we demonstrate a commitment to the community to really, and we can educate and do more from a transparency perspective to say these roadways will be taken care of, not foreseeing any significant economic downturn or anything like that. Right now, we have a $1.7 million transfer from the general fund that goes into the capital projects fund, which helps support the overall capital fund's roadway improvements. And typically, we budget about $800,000 for the residential street program. And as Kent's going to show you in the next few slides, it's not enough based on this PCI report. So I'll stop there. But what I'd like to see come out of this study session is we come up with a strategy moving forward. So each year when we go into budget for the next 5 years, and then as we move into those 5 years, we're building for the next 5 years after that. So it's really a 10-year plan on addressing roadway maintenance.
Marcy?
I think with that discussion, it's just really important to really think about the financial side, because, Vicki, I can't speak for the Phillips, I don't actually remember it, but in past years, one of the considerations that we've had is we've looked at, here is the amount of money that we have, and here are the streets that are like an absolute must, and then we've had other streets that we've kind of added into that, trying to balance out some of the wards. But there's just a reality of, like, this was the funding that was there, and so we made choices based off of that. And sometimes it became this street just fit into the budget of what could be milled or paved, or so I think, similar to what I think our traffic calming conversation is going to be, is just don't know that you can just put a concrete number and just say this is what it is and this is how we make choices, and we just go through the list, because there are just other factors that come up as a discussion item that council has to consider.
I agree with that, and I think that it's important that we have those conversations. I think one thing that I would like to try and get away from is sometimes I feel like roads are paved based off of which council member is yelling the loudest, or whatever reasons they decide to make the best case for it. I get that there are some situations where that is going to, we're supposed to be advocating for our community, so that's fine. But how can we be really strategic about this? I would just like to have a better process overall. So when, Jenny says, hey, I want this street paved in my community because it's so bad and everyone's complaining, then we look at this process and we're like, well, Jenny, based off of this road, you couldn't fit in this order. And that way we have all of the information about all of the roads in our community, so we can prioritize which ones need the most work. Overall, I feel like I just need that information to kind of help me in these types of conversations when it comes to prioritization.
You're exactly right, and in a few slides, that's what we're trying to do, because it is hard for the engineering staff each year to say, oh my gosh, how do we pick these roads? Because it does seem like we've had the most calls from, or where the most complaints have come from. So again, you'll see in a few slides where we really try to, again, take the network that we're building based off the 2016 and 2019 PCI, look at that degradation, build a long-range plan of not only just mill and overlays, but the other treatments as well to continue to move the needle. And you can all see this slide right here, and this is probably the most important slide of all the slides, where again, you'll see where a healthy system is kind of that green line that goes through the graph, and where you'll see ours are marginal and fair, and where those were at in 2016 and where they're at in 2019. And those are the most expensive roads to fix. And so we need to push that bar to the right instead of letting it fall to the left. And at our current pace of the amount of money that we put in each year of $800,000, we will continue to go to the left, and quickly. So over from 2016 to 2019, our PCI only went up. It actually went up, I believe, 1 point. But if we projected that from 2019 to 2022, it will be down below 50, in the low 50s, because we just don't have the money to do mill and overlays. So in the next few slides, again, so here's the snapshot that we did. We looked at a 5-year plan of what it would take to get our roads to 70. Now, is that financially possible? At this point, no. But I have an alternative sheet here after we go through this, because, again, this takes time for us to put together. But this is a path to get to 70. And before we get into the next slide, we have 70 as a resolution, and Heather mentioned that. The national average is around 65. So, and our roads are at a 60. So again, the handout I'll hand out later will give us a path that what could it be if we try to get to 65, and what do those dollars look like. But for now, this is the path to get to 70, and kind of what it would take. So again, don't look at everything on its value or what roads are being picked, but more of this is the plan and the process that we put in, and it's a relative thing depending on how many dollars we add or how many dollars we take away.
Mr. Mayor, before we move on, give me a central, I need a boundary on this map. You know what I mean? Just point to something. I know you pointed to Washington. Show me where on that map 120th is now. On the city street map.
Right here's 120th.
Okay, now come
So
down
it's
to a little bit
very
further.
good, and it's good,
So
and
then
it's
the-
fair, and then it's
Come down
good.
where?
Then down here at the bottom is Ward 4. I just want to make sure I'm looking at it
Oh.
right. That's all I'm trying to do.
So poor,
Yeah.
So peach is poor,
I
yellow
was looking at
is
that.
marginal. So we've got a stretch of fair. Fair will eventually become marginal, eventually become poor. And then Huron Street, that's Huron Street, right? Excellent. Very good is the blue. So we've got a stretch of good in here.
So I was just more, Heather, trying to find my boundaries, to figure out where I was and what we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, 104th, Washington, 120th, Huron,
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
112th.
Highway.
Jenny?
I'll get you some there.
So Kent, similar to what Julie was asking for in terms of a process and the way that we're thinking about the numbers that we're seeing up here, are you essentially taking the streets with the worst PCI and prioritizing them as far as the number of miles that we're repaving or working on through 2024?
Not necessarily, because under that graph, we have to work on all the streets. We can't just do all mill and overlays, because again, the ones that are even rated excellent, if we don't do anything to those, they're going to continue to go to the left. And we want to do all treatments to keep roads that are good and very good in those categories, and keep pushing those up to last longer than just focusing on all the bad streets, because it'll be that cyclical cycle. You'll focus on all the poor streets and good, And then you'll get those up to excellent, but the excellent ones and the very good and the good that you ignored will be right back into the same category. So you have to treat the entire system. You can't just treat the worst ones.
So are we gonna write that out in like a policy, or is it in terms of a procedure for this is how we look at our roads as a city?
We can, if council would like to move in that direction.
I mean, I think we
That's
should
part
have
of the
something that's
discussion.
like written down that we can point to and share with the community. I mean, I feel like it's part of that transportation, that transparency piece that we're talking about, that too. That I think that we need to be able to point to, and people need to be able to understand and agree with our reasoning, because otherwise just kind of leaving it out there and letting folks just decide, I don't really feel like it's doing any of us a service or really creating a record of what we've done for the future.
A question about that. So to that point, we have this resolution from 2006, and I'm just wondering if that's what they were attempting to do, and then, I mean, it's saying that we're gonna keep our streets above 70, but then from 2006 on, that didn't happen. So was it they defined it and then didn't put the money toward it? They defined it and we had an economic downturn. So I guess what I'm just wondering is, to your point, if we're gonna write a piece of paper like this, how do we then stay on top of it and hold ourselves accountable to meeting it?
Marcy, do you have any background that you can provide in Joyce?
I mean, Joyce probably is better at going in at the first round. I would just say that, to my point earlier, the struggle that the council has had is there's this amount of money, the 800,000, and we tried to balance it, and I think we didn't feel like, just didn't feel like there was the funds to shift it over to do more. I mean, there needs to be more money for sure in order to do this, and I've already looked ahead at the slides, so I know that conversation, but I think the intent was there, it's just that the funding wasn't there. But
And that's exactly right. There wasn't the financial means at that time. There was the downturn, and then they had to kind of prioritize with other things that were going on in the city, what they could do, so that's what happened. And definitely we wanted the 70% and more. We just couldn't do it at that point.
So is this an example of an unfunded mandate? That's what I'm saying.
That's not quite true, because a resolution is more of a guideline,
Okay.
Versus an ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think of it as a guideline performance standard, which we're striving to meet. And part of why we're having this discussion is Kent and I see that there's a disconnect between the funding side of things. Now, we have a potential solution to that, but it's going to require significant buy-in and resources over a 5-year plus period of time. And so the benefit of having criteria in an updated resolution would help provide that performance expectation that council's setting if you do moving forward.
Okay, so from this chart, you can see that the work that we're doing in 2019, this year, is projected to raise our PCI to 62. So in the example that we put together, if we were to put $5 million in the collectors and locals into 2020, we would raise our PCI to 67. And then in subsequent years, if we put in 1.75 million, we would raise that a single point for the next 4 years to get to 70 in 2024. Then after that, in 2024 or in 2025, it would be another dollar amount to maintain that 70. So that's kind of what the program looks at. And so that's for the collectors and the locals, dumping again $5 million in 2020 and 1.7. Again, that's nearly double of what we have each year currently. This is the same or similar exercise for the arterials. And again, the arterials, they're not funded out of the residential street program because they're too large of projects. So you're looking at a 2020 of 1.5 million to resurface with asphalt Huron Street. In 2021, another $1.5 million to do 104th. And again, in the treatments from the far right, you'll see FWM, which is a full width mill and overlay because they're below that 60 rating. So you can kind of see what the 5-year plan for that would be, what it would take to get to the rating of 70 over the next 5 years. This is kind of a summation of those two things put together of what the funding would look like as each year for the next 5 years. And this is the poorest map ever. This would be, and you can flip ahead to, let me flip ahead for you, I guess. So, if you put in $5 million, that would be the list of streets that we would do treatments on. And this is what it would look like on the map.
What's in yellow?
All of it.
Well,
So
what's in
again-
yellow is the boundary.
Yeah,
but
the
then
yellow
it'd be
is
the
boundary.
smaller yellow.
So you can see where we're treating marginal streets, fair streets, good streets, very good streets. We're doing various treatments to our entire system, not just addressing the worst streets. And so that kind of, the illustration of the map that's on the overhead says in words of what you would need to do. A full width mill and overlay. On those lists of streets, the middle ones would be the edge mill and a thinner overlay. And the other ones in the far right corner would be those areas where we could do a chip seal or a slurry seal with a combination of crack sealing because those are probably very good those are probably very good roads right now. And we would put those into the excellent category.
I'm not understanding. I'm back on your other sheet where you've got the rehab plan and investment impact.
That's what,
And
okay.
It's
go ahead.
like, when I look at that 2023 and 2011 are the same, no, that's to Huron and that's to Zunite. I guess what I'm not understanding is you gave them a ranking, right? They each have a ranking, but we don't follow what I would think would be it should be 36, then 45, 44, 45, 47, and then we got a 62 at the end. So I guess I'm not understanding that.
How you're putting the combination of streets together. And
You mean why is Huron rated, the pavement condition index is a 36.
Right. And then in my mind, I'm thinking that the next one that would be up would be Huron 104th, Huron in Washington.
Thinking of PCI number.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going in order. And again, I think in our plan, what we look at is what is the average daily traffic on those
Okay.
roads and how many people does it impact the most people?
which is kind of going to the point that you're saying that just doing a number just doesn't work because there's a lot of other factors that come into play. Just like when we talk about traffic quality coming up, like there's just other verbal conversations that have to be had about it. That a number just can't, and the number guides it, but I just don't think that you can put a number on it and say, this is the worst one, and so it gets it. There's just other factors, right?
And the number that you're looking at again there, remember our earlier conversation where it's each block is broken up into a segment. So we're using the average. So there may be areas along that segment that are worse than 47. There could be I'm just trying to look here. It looks like along 104th, there's a 42, there's a 40, there's a 43, there's a 42, a 36, and a 37.
Okay.
So we're not in a vacuum where we're looking at those because we certainly wouldn't do just a portion of 104th and not the rest of it.
Right.
So we're trying to take all those numbers and kind of average them out and put a number on a paper. When we're in the engineering team, we're looking at it more as a whole of smart people, yes.
I think all you really want from me is the money.
So I don't want to get, before we go too far, I want to hand this paper out again that we just, what?
I got it. You gave it to me.
No,
You did.
I was going to argue with you.
Thank you.
Do you need your magic hat now? Thank you.
Oh, boy, I think
Thank you. Yeah, give that to Marcy. Yeah. You can have this one.
No, I got one. Marcy has
Oh,
one.
okay.
I don't.
But I can share.
Yeah, here.
Fine, Marcy.
We're good.
I generally know what the numbers are in that sheet. I'll peek on it.
Okay.
I'll look on
You're gonna
ours.
share?
Yep.
I don't know what street to stay on. Okay. So this is kind of our, what? So this was our 5-year plan, and again, once we put this together and then brought it forth and began discussions with Jason and Heather, we were like, we really don't have funding for that. That's almost impossible to do. What could we do? I don't have I don't even have a good map tonight. I apologize, but I don't even have another poor map that I could show you because we put this data together. But this is a plan that works for our city. Now Heather may be able to. Did we do something?
You're good. Are we good? Okay.
This is a plan that financially could work, and Heather may be able to speak on some of the financial background of it. I just put the plan together. But in 2020, if we kind of wrap this whole thing up and we say, if we did a new resolution and we went to more of the national average, put in those parameters and criteria to get our pavement condition to a 65, if we put in $3 million in 2020, we would get our PCI to a 64. If we spent $1.25 million for the next 4 years, we can maintain that 64. That doesn't get us to 65, but we can potentially afford this. And now we can again begin to build that longer. This is a 5-year plan. We can tweak this and maybe we get it. It's a 64.2 or a 64.5 or, what does that look like? Again, that's more information that we'll need to do. And with some more time. But this kind of gets us to where we could be in the next 5 years.
So the financial aspect of this, a couple of things. Right now, we have a 90% fund balance in the general fund. And so recall that I mentioned that we do a transfer annually of $1.7 million into the capital funds. And that goes to help support, in addition to the taxes that are dedicated within the capital projects fund. So we essentially have $18.8 million that's unrestricted using the number that Jason has plugged into the 2020 budget. And right now, the council has a minimum reserve policy of 25%. So I would not recommend going below our minimum target. I think that's a good number. GFOA, Government Finance Officer's best practice, is minimum 17%, which is certainly much greater than the state mandate. But oftentimes cities have the conversation that when you're holding on to anything above 35%, what are you doing with that funding and why are you holding on to that funding? And so we know that typically at the end of a fiscal year, we have money that does not get spent in the budget for a variety of reasons. It could be salary savings, it could be priority shifted and we didn't spend something that goes into the fund balance. And our fund balance has grown over the last several years, which is a good thing. As manager, I think it's important that we start addressing our unfunded project needs because that's the only way we're going to address roadway maintenance. So within the last couple of budget cycles, we've used reserve for one-time expenses. So when Jason breaks out that one-time expenditure number in the general fund, we're tapping into some of those funds, which is an appropriate use. Again, not falling below 25%, we have 90%. So my ask of council tonight is to get direction for us to go back and, using this as a guide, figure out a plan of how we can use reserve fund balance. I'm using those terms interchangeably, but they basically mean the same thing. And we would bring back information on this is where the reserve level would be, and then how we would rebuild the reserve level. Now, what we might need to do, and Jason and I have talked about this, is have the finance committee talk about tweaking the policy, and if council would be supportive of this, doing something like setting a 35% target if you wanted something above 25%. And so we would work between 35% and the 90% that we would have. It would be about how do we utilize those dollars in this plan. Or if council says, keep 25% minimum, so you're working within 25% and the 90%. So we have a couple options, but at this point, I don't think it's financially prudent to talk about any other options than looking at use of reserves, because we have such a high reserve level. We're not really in the position where I can say we should be looking at bonding or any other revenue mechanism, because I don't think it would be appropriate at this time. I think we need to look at our reserve level and not spend it down. I'm not recommending that at all, so I want to be clear on that. But finding that balance within our target is 25% the target, and what do we do with reserve above that? And then the other piece of this is, so as we near the end of the fiscal year, Jason's going to be making projections on, he already has for 2020 budget, but where are we going to end the year at? And the excess unspent expenditures that we have at the end of the year would go into the fund balance, and those funds could be directed to capital. So there's different models out there that Jason and I have talked about in terms of how we can direct funding into our capital projects fund to start chipping away at our roadway needs. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions, but those are our initial thoughts. And we bring a specific strategy back to council if you're interested in us doing that.
Marcy?
Of note, before we have a question, both of these plans, again, you'll see that there's an initial injection into the plan. So that is a necessary component of this. We don't have the ability to raise that PCI year over year without that kind of one-time big influx of dollars to really move the needle. If we continue to just, if we increased it to say $1 million a year, I don't know what that looks like for the PCI, but it's not going to get us where we need to be if we just year over year added a couple $100,000. We really do need that one-time injection. Now, there's other things that affects or impacts. Again, you can see the list of streets that we kind of listed. This year we did like 5 streets, and that's done by the engineering team. So you look at this list and you say, well, okay, who's going to watch those guys? So there's a capacity thing. But if we bid this type of a program, more than likely we're going to get one of those top contractors that you don't have to handhold as much. But that's a lot of work.
Marcy?
Thanks. I have 2 questions. One, can you just clarify for me if using the 2020 example of the $3 million amount, does the $3 million include what we normally already have allocated to streets? So is the $800,000-ish
Yes.
factored in already so we're not really tacking in another 3 million, right?
Right, and in 2020, we have approximately $1 million budgeted between residential street program, concrete, and then traffic signals. We lumped them together in the budget memo. So it's about $1,071,407 that's already existing. So if you take 100 out for traffic signal, do I have that right? Really, the remainder is residential and concrete with about 900,000. So it would just
We
be
split it
the-
back out in 2020 because we need the concrete funding separately.
Okay, so is concrete
No.
included in the, okay.
Concrete is a separate
So then it
program.
would just be 800,000 that is in the 2020 budget that you could subtract from the $3 million number
That's right.
to get what the additional would be needed.
My point of where I was going with that is I just wanted to make sure, are we saying 3 million or are we saying 3.8 million? So I just wanted to make sure it was.
No, I should have clarified that.
And I just want to make another comment while it's top of my mind. So, you know, if we move forward with this plan and all of these streets, and so many of them kind of come into the school area, I just wonder if there's the ability, we just kind of talked about coordinating and staffing, that we look at how these kind of come together and impact like the school time of year. I know for Ward 3, we recently had some unhappiness about timing on that, and you know, you try to explain that sometimes those things just happen and that's when funding happens, but with so many streets that could potentially be impacting, it'd be nice to know that council approves it and be able to get it moving, so some of that's happening in the summer months.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, this year we just, you know, with the transition that we went through and the changeover in staff and stuff, we just couldn't get the bids out in time, and
And I
we're
totally
paying
get
for
that
it.
happens,
So
I just.
again, that's why we're here now in October, so we can get this plan and put together and hopefully, you know, putting something out on the street at the first of the year, so we get those favorable bids and those good contractors that aren't already booked up for the entire 2020 season. You know, so yeah, we want to get going right away. Not only on residential streets, but all of our programs.
I have a quick question. So about changing the PCI goal from 70 to 65 or 64, I guess, in this case. Is there kind of a cost analysis that we need to consider as well? So for example, does it save the city more money in the long term to keep our roads at 70 versus at a 64?
I don't believe our roads have ever been at a 70.
If we were to get them to a 70?
I'm not sure. We could run the analysis on that, but even in the scenarios that we presented, it's still static. So when we raised it to 64, it's $1.25 million to maintain a 64. And then when it was at a 68, you know, to raise it from 2021 to 22, it stayed static at 1.7 and it still remained at 68. So I would think that it would be more relative, where whatever that number we pick is, then the dollar value is less that you're investing, but you can maintain that system as long as you're treating the entire system. Does that make sense?
Page 24 of the packet, there's a great chart as part of the PCI report that breaks down the life cycle, if you will, where they give relative remaining life. So when you fall into those categories of very excellent, very good, you know, you can see 15 to 25 year lifespan, and then certainly, so that's where Ken's talking about, we've got to take care of the lower rated streets, but at the same time be watching the deterioration of the highly rated streets, because eventually they'll fall. And if you think back to that graph, we want to move our roads to the right and not have them on the left.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of maintaining the entire system. I think my question was more specific about, is there a cost analysis that we need to consider? Is there a difference between maintaining our roads at 70? Do we save more money in the long run versus a 64? That's just my question. So, and if you haven't done that yet, that's fine.
No, but I think it's just the level of where you want your road at. So
Yeah.
at 70, our roads are gonna be, what's the rating? Good. And at 65, they're still gonna be good, but at 70, they're gonna be a little bit better. So,
Which will require more upfront funding in the short term than the long term.
Yes.
Yeah.
did you answer the question, or we're still not there?
It's okay. I don't think you're getting it, but that's fine.
I think I understand it, so
okay.
we'll talk and we'll figure out how to, part of what's challenging about our situation is the backlog.
Yeah.
And so we've got to get caught up on the backlog. And I think if we didn't have as much of a backlog, it would be easier to figure out what would normal maintenance look like. But we'll talk and figure out if we can come up with a way to do that cost
Yeah, well,
benefit.
and just to be honest with you, I think that this whole process and the attention to our roads has been long overdue. I mean, I would like to see a solid plan that's gonna get us to where we need to be. I think if it's 64 or 70, I don't know what's the best choice between the two. But, you know, I just wanna see a plan where we have a process laid out of how we're going to prioritize which streets, and then how are we going to get there in 5 years. So I completely support this entire work and plan. I think we have a lot of details we're going to figure out still, but I think we're on the right track.
Anybody else want to weigh in? I think it's a great plan, and I think it reminds me a little bit about painting your house. If you let it get to the point that you need to sandblast it and scrape it and everything else, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And this way, we stay with it. You know, a little washing, a little caulking, and a little something. We don't have to do that major work.
So how would we make the determination what we should do a resolution on? Or should we even do a resolution? Because as we see from this one, it's really,
I think our intent is to have a much more detailed
Plan.
list of criteria and plan. So we can, if council is in agreement, then we can go back and figure out what that criteria can be based on the discussion we heard, and then figure out the financial strategy, bring that back. Don't know if we can do that in November. We'll figure out a time frame and then get your reaction to that. And so I think it's a combination of both things. I mean, we could, just talking off the top of my head, we could come up with a specific criteria and then and it would all tie back to this 2019 PCI. And then as we move forward, given that it'd be a 5-year plan, we'll be doing another PCI study 3 years from now. And so then we would take that PCI study and look, hopefully you'll see progress and less of a backlog. And
You know, and bike lanes and parking lanes and sharrows and stuff. So we haven't overlaid that plan onto this plan, which talks about what we were talking about, the strategic planning, is that master transportation plan, and then we get into our signal maintenance. So, you know, again, taking that snapshot, this is what it takes to get the roads, just the asphalt, to this level. Now, financially, we can do the plan that was kind of handed out, but again, that doesn't look at those additional costs for striping, or how bad the sidewalks are on a segment of road and it need to be replaced. So there's still more work to be done. And it's gonna take longer than, regardless of what plan you do, I don't know that we can get there in just 5 years. I mean, anything's possible, I guess, but it's more of a impact, influx, inject the system, raise the PCI, what does it take to maintain, and then what does that 5 to 10 year plan look like to get us where we want to be, including the transportation, the striping, the mobility, and all those things that we've talked about over the last year, you know, as those things start to come together in the next couple of years.
can I ask just one Jenny first.
Start yelling and talking. No, I wait. I guess a couple of questions. One is with this plan that's, I guess, less expensive than the first plan on your slideshow, does 2020 and the amount that you have here bring us up to date on the backlog? Or is it just like teeny tiny, like the list that you got up there?
I really don't have that information. I'd have to go back and look on that.
Okay, because my concern is that, I appreciate this, I would feel more comfortable pushing towards the 70 and being more aggressive and being more ambitious and figuring out how we get there, because I don't want to just continue to bite off little chunks, because I feel like that's part of the reason we're in this boat. And I want to see the backlog, I want to see that amount of work that we have to do decrease instead of continuing to stay the same. And frankly, it really frustrates me when I hear residents tell me that they're feeling frustrated that we can afford to build a recreation center, but we can't afford to take care of our roads and our infrastructure. So I just have a tough time continuing to kick this down the road when I feel like we just need to deal with it.
I understand, and I think it ties into Councilmember Molika's ask for cost-benefit analysis. So we'll come up with an exercise and bring that information back to you. We'll show you the more aggressive approach, and then so the 70-64 or something in between, based on how the financial strategy fits in.
Becky?
Because I don't know a lot about roads, even though I've listened to this for like 4 years, I still, when you do a roof, how you can do the initial roof, and then you can put on a second layer on top of it or a third layer on top of it before the city or the state makes you go down to the bare woods, right? Is that the same thing with streets? Can we only do we only do the microservice and the chip seal once, and then in 2 years it moves up to the next stage?
Yeah, you can do, typically, depending on it starts with the base. So if the subgrade is good and the base is strong, well, then you can continue to build on that foundation, just like a home. If the foundation is strong, you continue to build. If the home gets blown down by a tornado and the foundation is strong, you can build back on that foundation. So if the subgrade is good, then you can continue to kind of slurry or grind down and continue to build on that same layer. But when you drive down roads and you see, and it's clod, for example, when you drive down and it's kind of wavy in spots, and again, we're addressing that with the CDBG here coming up in a couple weeks, where we're going to have to go through and pick areas that have the subgrade has failed, and we need to go in there and fix that subgrade because it's poor and build that foundation back. Then after we build that foundation, clod may look a little patchy this year, but we've built that solid ground again, where then next year or the year after we can go in and we can put a chip or a slurry and protect that entire surface and continue to push that road into the 8, 10 year projections for longevity.
Is that what the lifespan of a road is?
Like if you repave, it's like 15 to 20 years for a newly paved road.
Yeah, I think they have 25 in that index.
They're
More
wishing.
generous.
Yeah, and maybe that's in backwoods of Kentucky or something, I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
Anybody else? None? You have the information that you need?
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda, C, is traffic calming policy update.
Before we do that, Mr. Mayor, may we have a health break?
He'd like
Restroom
that
break.
seat.
I'm sorry?
Kent would like a restroom break. Is
Yeah,
that okay if we
I
take
said-
a
I
short
said
break?
done.
Yeah.
That's what that means. Go for it.
We're timing you.
I heard something else. Okay. Joyce, okay, everybody's here. Go ahead, Kate.
Okay, last topic for this evening is traffic calming. Again, the memo summarizes what we'll go over in the slides. So the progression of this is we'll go through our existing policy and then kind of what we've done based on our research and what we feel are some proposed changes. And then we can get into how those changes will impact, or if you'd like to see anything different.
And if I could just jump in real quickly and provide a little bit more context. Part of why we're bringing this topic to council tonight is we know that we've really been inundated, I think would be a fair statement to say, with requests to do assessments on certain roadways. And what we're finding is when we do those assessments, we do the traffic counts, and the data does not show that improvements are warranted based on the current criteria, residents are very frustrated with us. And so Kent has done some review and analysis of other cities and will present what we're recommending. We really want your feedback on if you think this will help move the needle and be more responsive to citizens and help explain why we have it structured the way we have it. But I do know, just in the year and few months that I've been here, anytime I go to a ward meeting, I probably have requests about traffic, 2+ requests a week. Some weeks more than others, but I know that the biggest frustration for residents is, and there's a definite trend, if they fall between that 25 and 30 miles per hour, and it's not warranted to do any type of improvement. It's residents don't understand that, and we appreciate their frustration with the policy and so we're trying to find a way to be more responsive.
Thank you. All right, so background, our traffic calming policy was implemented in 2016 for local and collector streets. Again, this is local and collector streets only. Traffic calming is intended to influence motorist behavior and prevent undesirable driving practices. This is achieved through a combination of physical and non-physical measures, and traffic calming services provided by the city are traffic control devices and traffic enforcement by the police. And I cannot understate that enough, that traffic enforcement is part of traffic calming. And I think we're really moving forward. Heather has that, and the chief are really working hard on improving that traffic enforcement, and as we get the officers that build that traffic team to get where we want to be. So this first slide is, can everybody see that okay? Yeah, that one came out all right. Is our current policy. So currently, any resident calls and submits their concern about traffic calming. Says, hey, somebody's speeding on my road. The engineering team immediately starts a study. So that means the traffic engineer or one of our engineers has to take that request, get back with the resident, find out where the area is, develop the area of influence, get with the operations team. We have to put out the counters. We get the counters back. We do the study. So you can kind of see where one resident takes up significant staff time in our current policy. So when we get the study results back after our current results are that you need to be 7 miles an hour over the speed limit, over the posted speed limit of 85% of the vehicles. So that means for 25, you need to be at 32, and for 20, you need to be at 28. So if they meet those requirements, and everybody here is familiar with the requirements, then we went into the petition phase. And again, when we initially put this plan together in 2016, at that time when we were doing our research, that seemed to be kind of the direction that areas were going. I think since that time, that iWatch program in Thornton has developed, some other municipal programs have adopted traffic calming because it's not just a Northglenn problem, it's a regional problem. So at that time, again, it was kind of, that petition, get that signed and then see where we could go, have a community meeting vote on some trends and some things that could work, and then implement those procedures. Well, what we've learned over the last 3 years is that we're not getting that petition signed. The residents or the neighborhood, they don't want to get it signed. It's too cumbersome or burdensome on that area. So that's our current policy. And again, when the study results come back and they're within that 7 miles an hour of 85% of the vehicles, we say there's no further action required. And as Heather has mentioned, on more than one occasion lately, they call you again and they say, hey, we just got told that our speed is at 29 miles an hour and they're not going to do anything. So then one of you calls Heather, and then Heather calls me, and then we do this circle again, and we do the study again, and we come up with same or similar results, and then again, it's a vicious cycle.
Jeremy?
Can you tell me, where does the 7 miles per hour come from?
Again, in 2016, when we looked at that, when we looked at other jurisdictions around the nation and around our area, 7 seemed to be kind of that number. But I think in just that short period of time since 2016, things have changed so dramatically that that number really isn't applicable. And we found that out through our own studies. And we'll see that as we move forward. So in a snapshot, over the last 2 years, we have completed, the engineering department and operations department have completed 36 speed studies. Now again, I kind of kicked off with those take time to do. And so you can see all the areas. We've just about blotted the city here of various speed studies in the area. Now, 5 of those locations were 7 miles and over, but those 5 locations include Claude, Melody, 112th, and Livingston, where we have new devices down. 9 of those locations were within the 5 miles an hour, and we're getting there. So this is the beginning of the transition. We're within 5 miles an hour of that 85th percentile speed. So they were between 25 and 30, 9 of those studies. But in our current policy, those studies don't make the grade, and we say there's nothing that we can do. As we move forward into a proposed policy, this is kind of what we've put together. You should have seen, I guess I'll go back. Before you should have seen a blue sheet on here. It's not part of the slide, but this is in a snapshot kind of the cities that we looked at, and you can see the blue areas. Those are the things that we kind of looked at that are the same or similar to our policy and what those municipalities were doing. So we kind of took, again, we looked at it holistically and said, hey, maybe Boulder's doing 3. Well, that's really low. And maybe somebody else is doing 6. And so where does ours fit in? And when we look at our data, our studies, we kind of pick 5 is a good number. But again, that's all up for discussion and where do you think we fall. So that's kind of some of the things that we looked at when we developed this proposed policy. So the new proposed changes would be, we get a request from a resident, and the resident is assigned to be that point of contact. Now, the engineering team will define the area. They'll say, hey, you're speeding between X street and Y street in this area. Well, we'll look at it and develop a map, very similar to what we do already, of what is the area that would be influenced by a traffic calming measure. We will then provide that back to the point of contact or the resident, and that resident will be required to receive 12 signatures or 20% of the area that is designated, whichever is less. After they get the required signature, so what this does, I guess as I explain as I go along, this kind of takes away the one caller and go to action form. This puts, if speeding is such a problem in the neighborhood, then at least 12 of your neighbors should say that there also is a speeding problem in your area. that seems like a fairly low threshold to get to. And if it's less than 12 or 20%, if the area is, only 50 people, then, you only need 10. But whatever that number is based on the area that we select. So it just is a tool to not be so reactionary and put more of the onus back on the resident or the neighborhood in general. So once the 12 signatures are required, and let's just use 12 for the example, they let us know, and we say, okay, great. Now we'll do the study. We will put the speed radar or the detectors out, and we have tubular radars, and we have radars, and we'll put those out and there's an error, it's 7 days. We'll do a 7-day study. So it'll capture weekends, it'll capture a holiday, it'll capture every day of the week, peak hours, it'll capture all the data in 1 week, in a period of time.
Is it possible to hide the machine?
We have the tubes that go on the road that you see, which the studies that we've done do not affect or impact drivers' behavior. We've done them with the tubes, and then we have new ones that we can hang in a tree or on a pole that's a radar. And our information of our 36 studies that we've done does not indicate that a person drives any different seeing a tube versus not seeing anything. That's ours. That's our information. Now, we haven't done a national study, but we can buy more radar ones, and we can not do the tubular ones. Usually we save the tubular ones for the major arterials if we're doing counts in those areas, because drivers on 104th and Washington and Huron, they're not going to slow down for anything anyway.
What do the tubular things do?
They capture volume, so they capture the amount of vehicles going, they capture the speed.
Oh, they do capture the speed.
And they capture the axles, so you can tell if it's a
Big truck.
motorcycle, a truck, a semi,
Okay.
a passenger van, whatever. So it captures all that data. And we'll also look at the accident data and if there's been any tickets issued in the area as well. So once that's done, and if the information comes back and they meet those first two criteria, which is a collector or local street, and the average daily traffic is 2,500 vehicles or less, and they meet the 85th percentile speed of 5 miles an hour over, then we will just implement traffic calming measures. We will just go out and put down speed humps or the radar signs that say your speed is. Whatever the measure is, we determine in-house as a temporary measure for the next 6 months. And we will continue to monitor that area with those measures in place. Now, simultaneously, while that's happening, in those 6 months, we need to get back with the neighborhood where we had the 12 signatures, and we need to try to get a majority of the area to buy into the traffic calming that will be implemented permanently, if that's required. Whereas we had before in the old policy, we had the petition phase, which was 75% of the people. Here we're asking for a simple majority, 50% plus one. And we would then have a community meeting that would give them, because maybe we put down the speed humps as a temporary measure because that's what we have, or we put up the radar signs because that's what we have. But maybe it really requires a rotary or a bulb out or some other device that we need to look at from a consulting or engineering standpoint, and that's where this phase kind of works in. Yes?
Kent, so with the 50% plus one, what would that look like? Like, can you give me an example? Like, how many signatures you expect that to be?
So in an area of 100, that person would initially be required to get 10 signatures. So if we got the 10 signatures and brought it back and we did the study and it came in at 4 miles an hour, at 29 miles an hour, we put the the measures down, and then in that 6 months, we begin working with that point of contact to get, in our scenario, 50 signatures, 50 plus 1, 51 signatures of the 100 people in the neighborhood to come to a community meeting or sign up that, yes, traffic calming is a problem in our area and we want to look at permanent measures.
And is the staff is assisting this individual with reaching out to folks, or the onus is exclusively on the point of contact?
And that's going to come at the end when we talk about a level of service of how this gets implemented. Currently, I don't know that we have the capacity to go out and help get those types of signatures, but again, we have a new communications director. Maybe there could be some advertising or something, bringing that community together in that area. I don't exactly know what that looks like.
Okay, I definitely want to have more discussion on that point, because from my perspective, it's less signatures to run for city council than it is to get something done on your street, and I think that's problematic. So I just want to stick a pin in it. Let's keep talking about it.
Well, my questions on the same issue is, so tell me again, why do we need to have the person collect 50% plus 1 neighborhood votes? I mean, if you already did the study, they already, there's a problem, you're already gonna put in temporary issues. Why do we need to have that person go and collect more signatures to solve a problem we already know that needs to be solved?
From our engineering standpoint, we're just looking for buy-in. Now, if the area says that, again, right now, if one person says there's a problem, they represent the entire area because it's just one person.
Yeah.
So if we put it on and we say, okay, 10 people are required to say that there's a problem, now 10 people say that there's a problem. But do the other 90 people think that there's a problem?
But at this point, you have 7 days of data that say there's a problem. You're not talking about people, you're talking about data that you collected yourself.
But the problem is relative because we're talking about 7 days of data at 85 percentile speed, and is speeding at 28 miles an hour, is that, we're saying that is a problem, but is it a problem? I mean, again, that's what I think we're here to discuss.
So we hear that the participatory element of this process and the proposed changes we definitely need to get feedback on, because I can tell you I can be out at a ward meeting and hear I love the temporary speed humps, and also hear I can't stand them. When are you going to pull them up off of the street? So part of what we're trying to find the balance, and I don't know if we can strike a good balance, is their neighborhood buy-in. I agree that we can do the counts and we can say, yes, there is a problem based on this criteria, but what is the solution, how we respond to it? It's how participatory do you want that process?
I don't want that person to go back.
So, I think in 2016, when we did this, we had a criteria up front that they had to get signatures on a petition for us to even start considering this. And then we reverted backwards, and we said we were gonna take that out at the upfront part because it was so challenging, and we heard feedback that residents were struggling to get their neighbors to participate. And so it looks like what we did is we just kind of shifted it from the beginning where the submit request starts, and we just moved it down like 3 steps, but we put it back in. What we took out in 2016 because it didn't work. Don't get me wrong, I think there's a challenge. I mean, I think Julie and I, we heard it at our board meeting, there were residents who were like, speed humps, and then adamant, I don't like them. And so I think there is trying to figure out that balance and getting the buy-in, but I just don't know how we do that and be helpful to residents who are really frustrated.
I'm also concerned about issues of I'm really old and I can't really walk a lot. How am I going to go around and get 50 signatures? Or I'm in a wheelchair. How am I gonna go and knock door? I'm not sure if anyone's tried to knock doors in a wheelchair. I think that'd be kind of hard. So I mean, it's like, how are we kind of being also inclusive about this process? And making sure that if we're gonna ask this person to go around and get 50 signatures or whatever it is, 50%, I mean, one, that's a lot of time investment. So this person has to be super passionate. It just kind of sounds like to me that we're creating a really good roadblock so we don't have to do anything. Or like, we don't have to continue with this process. So I don't know, it just sounds a little much for me. I understand you're trying to get community involvement. I think maybe a lower threshold would be something I'd be more comfortable with.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
So I remember when I ran for council in 2017, and I was knocking on doors on Melody Drive, and I met a resident who was trying to go through a process as is. And she was sharing that she had just had knee surgery. Her husband was not physically able to walk around and get petition signatures. They had tried, but they couldn't find their neighbors and figure out when they were home. And when their neighbors were home, they were busy cooking food. They didn't have time. They had other things going on, other priorities. But they have, the folks who were trying to circulate the petition had young kids in their house, or not young kids, grandkids in their house, and just felt so defeated and felt so frustrated that they were trying to work through the process and they just couldn't get through it, that it was just too steep of a hill to climb. And I appreciate that we're trying to build in the community engagement piece here. It's not there yet for me. I think the petition piece is just not quite right. I'm with Julie in that I think it's this roadblock, for a better term, that like people just can't plow through. And I think about how we've been having a lot of conversations about how Northglenn, you know, and our city is made up of multi-generations. And so I think that we need to keep that in mind when figuring out how we're answering this question, because a petition process to me is not necessarily meeting every generation where they're at. So I hear the piece around like get your neighbors together and like tell the city that there's a problem, but I'm kind of in the place where I'm like, we know there's a problem, we're not doing anything about it. That to me is a problem.
So let's take it step by step, I guess. So let's go to step one. Is there buy-in with making a point of contact and getting, again, the numbers can be different, 12 signatures or 20% of the initial buy-in before we do a study? Do we still want the resident to call and then the engineering team does a study? I guess that's kind of step one, if we take this step by step. Does one resident represent an entire neighborhood, or do we at least want that resident to get some other buy-in?
So I think about how Lauren was sharing with me that her neighborhood just did a cleanup. And that they all banded together and got their dumpster. And they had 5 households that banded together to get their free dumpster to clean up the trees in their neighborhood. And so I feel like there's already a threshold there. Like if it's 5 households for a dumpster, maybe it should be 5 households for a traffic calming study.
I favor the application request. I'm not sure about the number of signatures required. I think the city has a responsibility when they receive a request to investigate, and the radar or the, what did you call it, the drop cord? Or?
Tubes. Just the traffic counter in general.
To see if there is a problem. Once we identify the problem, then I think we can proceed in different ways. Because I've been walking the neighborhood, I have gotten a lot of compliments on the removal of the speed bumps, which I was, I wanted to see those. What most residents said about Melody Drive from here on to 104th, that the radar, the speed readers were more effective because their brain isn't on when they're driving, they're just driving. And when they see that thing flashing, they go, oh wow, I'm going 33 miles an hour, and they get back down to 25. In fact, I think we only have 3 on Melody. I know the request went to like every 300 or 400 feet we should have one so that people can, keep it in their computer because it downloads after you pass that one, you don't see another one, you accelerate again. And they seem to find those more effective. And in terms of, I know that the police, we don't have a traffic section now, but if you see you have a real problem on Melody Drive, Cloud Court, Livingston, you put a couple of police out there for a couple of days, that'll calm some people down. I know we don't have that right now, but if and when we get there, that'll calm, because we'll have the data to support that they should be there. We'll say, this is a real problem on Melody. These guys are driving 45 miles an hour. I'm gonna go.
Well, it's preliminary right now, but we had the speed humps down and we took them up for Melody for the construction and we continued the speed study and the speeds.
That's what I told them.
The speeds went up immediately.
Yeah.
And the radar signs weren't removed, so, in this interim, while we're waiting for the valves and the construction of the road and the striping, the speeds are up again. So.
Yeah. How are we doing on that? I know that we've been backlogged, but.
The valves came in today, and so we should begin the work next week on the valves. So, I'm sorry.
Are they still gonna do the 1 lane on each side?
Yeah.
That is gonna happen.
Yes, Melody is 1 lane on each side for the striping, so.
Between 104th and Huron.
Yes.
So Melody, the improvements being made on Melody tie into the Connect Northglenn plan. So when you look at that plan, that improvement was rated as a high, or identified as a high priority improvement.
So back to step 1, I guess. So if we lower this to 5, we can add in here that, maybe a member from the engineering team or somebody, again, we're gonna have to talk about a level of staffing and a level of service for our staff, and maybe that comes after this. But we can say, hey, the engineering team will assist the resident or point of contact in obtaining the required signatures. But as the director of public works and the former engineering manager, having one person call and that team goes into action, it's a lot of work for our staff. And if we just back up and we just showed the roads that we would need to do. We're the project managers for all the CIP projects. We have 4 engineers. The city of Thornton has 1 person who does just the iWatch program. They have 5 traffic engineers. The city of Westminster has 6 traffic engineers. We have 4 that do everything. So when we say that we can help them, we really have to be aware that there's a lot of things that team does, and we'll have to look at what we can continue to do.
Well, does it have to be here to
Really, it should be the engineering team. They're the ones with the knowledge. I don't know what other, I don't have another division in Public Works that I would feel comfortable with, because you're talking about, different levels of education even.
Maybe we could see if we could utilize volunteers through our volunteer program. We could look at some different options. Possibly the police department with CPAN volunteers, that might be an option. We haven't talked about that with Chief. So,
Wait, are we talking about the engineering department helping find 5 residents on the street, or are we talking about the 50+1?
5. We're on step 1.
We're on step 1.
Okay, because I'm pretty sure that 5 residents should be easy. And if it's not, we can reevaluate it if we get the feedback that it's not easy. But that, if that to me seems super attainable. But I'd like,
Okay, well, and as to Julie's point, I guess, and we can take it on a case-by-case basis, but if they say, hey, I broke my leg, or I'm disabled, or I'm elderly, can I get some assistance, then we can look into some other alternatives. All right, let's move on to step 2, can we? Or
No.
no. All right, step 2. So 7 days for a study. You want to just make it a mandate that we only use on the local and collectors. We only use radars, no tubes, then it's consistent?
So the concern with the tubes is that motorists approach the tubes and they slow down. Our data shows a completely different perspective on that, but it's a perception issue. So Ken's recommendation is we could do just the radar. So they're a little bit more discreet. Sometimes you can see them, sometimes you can't. Right now we use a combination of them based on availability, in terms of where.
We've redone 3 studies because somebody said that they were slowing down because of the tubes. And so we redid them with the radar. And they showed even.
Can I just I just want to make a comment in defense of our residents. They feel that the cars are going faster. And I understand that you're saying that they don't slow down because of the signs, they don't slow down because of the ribbon cutters. But you have to understand that our residents see a problem, they know that there's a problem out there. So they want to know another way maybe of looking at it, because I'm listening to you and I'm hearing you. And our residents are going to be sitting at their homes saying, well, that's really great that we don't have enough staff. That's really great that, they slow down, but that doesn't solve their problem.
And I think another part of that is just the education piece, very similar to when we began this evening and spoke about the snow removal level of service. I mean, developing a video, and I've thought even of an example of a person, standing and seeing a car drive by at 25 miles an hour versus a car driving by at 35 miles an hour. When you're in your yard and your back's turned and a car goes by, you think that car just zoomed by you at 50 miles an hour, when in fact it was like 27 or 25. So I think some education on that, helping the residents, educate them in that area. We have one resident, I don't know where he lives, but he says he sits on his porch and he'll watch the cars and then he runs out because one of the radar, like the mayor said, is near his home. So he can see it. So he sees the car go by, races off his porch, and he looks at the monitor and he says 27. Or he races off the porch and he sees it, speeding. Again, when we get to the point where we have some enforcement and maybe we have a motorcycle team or something that is parked out there and we're writing, some tickets on some of these streets. So I think it's an evolution. I think the purpose for us bringing this back now is because it's right now it's not working, and we need to do something different until we continue the evolution of our traffic calming policy. And so again, this is kind of our first step, and we can continue to work through this.
So I'm just going to recommend, if people say, and they're making you redo these studies because of the road tubes, can we just go with the radar counters to save everybody time?
Yep, we can.
I mean, if it gives us the same thing, I mean, it saves time in the long run. You get the same data.
And then we'll continue to look at the accident data and tickets issued in the area.
And that's a new piece that we're building into this approach. We haven't historically done that necessarily. I think anecdotally, we hear about accidents that have happened, any significant issues, but engineering will take a hard look at data.
So step 3, are we on to step 3? Okay, are we good with, is 5 miles an hour a threshold? When we go back to the earlier slide, the map, so 9 locations were 5 miles an hour over. So if we use the speed hump analogy, where we have 5 locations with speed humps, we would have had 5 locations plus 9 more with speed humps. We'd have 14 locations in our city with speed humps. And we really need to space these speed humps, not how we spaced them before, with gaps. They need to be spaced at the criteria of 400 or 500 feet. So there's going to be more of them. But that's the 5 mile an hour threshold. Now, if you want, every time you lower it, you're going to add in more locations.
So I think Julie asked the question earlier, what is Westminster and Thornton doing? What's their threshold level?
Well, Thornton is different because they have the iWatch program.
What does that mean?
That means that they involve their neighborhood and they have a program where they implement their residents, or they empower their residents to become part of the program, and they're able to report, and they do monitoring of the areas. So it's a more of a community type program.
Requires 50%, requires a resident must collect 50% of neighborhood support to be accepted into a program. And so they put burden, or whether or not, either way you view it, they require 50% of neighborhood support to participate in iWatch. And then the city does an internal, investigates the different options. And then they ask residents to call the city with descriptions of vehicle and driver. If they see, so it's somewhat self-enforcement with reporting, speeding motorists, as well as traffic enforcement through the police department.
And they have signs, so if you drive through their neighborhood, there's an iWatch sign, and it's an iWatch neighborhood, and they're able to get yard signs that the city provides to them, so. It's a really neat, I think Becky brought it up a few years ago. It's a great program. It just is.
From a
We're-
communication standpoint, yes.
Yeah,
They have
we're-
a great brochure, great video.
The program's really awesome.
I mean, it sounds like if they're doing a really good job, then maybe that's something that we can look at possibly bringing to Northglenn.
It is, and as I mentioned earlier, they have one person who that's all he does.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. They're a much larger city than we are. But I'm curious, what is Westminster doing?
They don't have a program right now.
They don't have a traffic calming program?
No.
That surprises me.
I think they're developing theirs.
Yeah, you have that there
Yep.
looking up.
And I emailed their traffic engineer and talked to him, and they're in the process of developing theirs for 2020 late or 2021.
Marcy's got her hand up for
Marcy?
So, because I am going back to forever ago when this comment was made, I think the issue that I have with reducing it from 5, is just that I think it's important for council to consider what that looks like. And both from putting these speed humps down and the cost perspective. I give an example. I have 3 blocks within about 6 blocks that are adamant about speed humps. I mean, you want them on every street? I mean, like, where's that gonna, I know it's not gonna be the favorable comment, and it's just a struggle that I have with putting them on every single street, and it's a speeding problem as a whole, and just to the point, I just want to say that the whole traffic calming thing and relying solely on police, you know, many years ago, Kyle and I, we had a whole neighborhood program around that at 118. We had residents that came and were adamant about it being the daycare center that was having the speeders. And we sat 2 police officers out there, and you know who we caught? All the residents. And who kept doing it? All the residents. And so there's some truth in, like, you calling your own resident out on it. But I just don't know that we lower the threshold really to a point where it just passes, just so that every block has speed hump. Because you know, even in the Citizens Police Academy, they have a conversation about the perception of hearing a car accelerate and speeding, looking around a corner, and so you think they're speeding and they're really not. And so I think that educational part is really important. But I just give caution that
lowering it, making it too easy, puts it in a place where you're gonna be answering to speed humps being all over the city, and how are you gonna pay for that?
Does speed humps have to be the end all be all? Because I know that we're not to step 4 or step 5 yet, but I mean, I hear you, Marcy, on the speed humps, and I know in Ward 4 with some of the speed humps on Melody, we were seeing traffic being diverted to streets that didn't have as much traffic as usual. So I think there are unintended impacts and consequences. But I like knowing that there are unintended consequences with that. I still think that we have to figure out how we're building a traffic calming policy that's responsive and inclusive. And I agree that traffic humps may not be the end all be all for that street, right? Like, I don't know if you want to think about like, if they're at 5 miles above, maybe you start with radar, or you start with your, whatever, this is how fast you're going. I mean, is there some sort of graduated approach that we can take, or some sort of like like we can do the conversation with the community that's maybe outside of a petition process? Because I'm curious, like with Melody Drive, was there actually a petition process that happened there, or did we just have enough data and enough frustrated residents that we took action?
Both Melody and Claude were overridden on the policy.
So
They were driven by council.
Mm-hmm.
So currently, like if a speed study is conducted and they meet, they're at 5 miles an hour, then we say that there's no further action required. But that doesn't mean that we don't do anything. We put out the portable trailers that we have. We let the chief know that, hey, there's speeding on this street. It doesn't meet the threshold, but we need to take a look at it. And we continue to look at the area. We don't just do nothing. But the problem that we're having and is we get the request, we do the study, we say it doesn't meet the requirements, and we do these other things, and then again, as we began, it circles back around, and then it may not be that resident, but you can see on the map that somebody else is calling on the same block. I mean, we do the same street 4 and 5 times with just different people. So that meets the threshold of the 5 if we lower that, but is speed humps the best method to slow it down? Immediately, if that's what we want to do, if we want to make that initial impact, then that's the tool that we have. Again, we've used the radar trailers. We put those portable radar trailers out, and they work for a week, and then we take them away, and 2 weeks later, it's back to the same.
Chief has suggested, we have our signals. Maybe we put red and blue flashers in them versus the yellow flashers. Some communities do that because it works.
Some people say I'm not safe, but.
Yeah, it's definitely an area by area. I think to Ken's point, the temporary speed humps, we see the initial decrease. But we know, as you indicated, we know that traffic goes elsewhere, because why would you drive down the street if you, and so it's a real challenge, and the age of our community and how our roadway system was developed, we are somewhat limited in terms of what we can do. I mean, Kent's done research with other cities, Denver and so forth, and some of those communities, they have more options to use roundabouts and other unique approaches, and we are somewhat limited with temporary speed humps, the flashers, speed enforcement. And Chief and I have talked about this, we pretty much talk about it every week, traffic enforcement. And I mean, part of the challenge is the perception is if we deploy officers on a roadway that they're gonna write several tickets, which is not necessarily the case, because simply having an officer on a roadway helps decrease speed, but we have to rotate them, and with a traffic unit that we can gear up for in the spring, with our staffing level increase, then we'll be able to do that in targeted areas. But it's not gonna be the ultimate solution. We're not gonna stop every speeder in the city. And I agree, we often find, and we're not the only community that sees this, that, you know, and I was talking to Sergeant Brown a couple weeks ago when I did a ride along with him, and he talked about several years ago, I think it was Fox Run, he went out to the neighborhood and was doing education around traffic enforcement, and had several complaints, and the city did targeted enforcement in Fox Run. And then when he went back to another meeting in Fox Run, a gentleman came up to him and thanked him because he actually was caught speeding in the neighborhood, and that gentleman was complaining to Sergeant Brown about how much speeding in the neighborhood. So we also have to be mindful that there's, you know, how hard of an enforcement approach do we want to take? And, you know, we'll get a better feel for that. We've been doing as much proactive enforcement as we can. And we'll get a better feel for it, I believe, in the spring once we have a traffic unit and we really start being strategic about what areas of the city we're doing enforcement in.
Are any of the 50 or whatever that you've had so far, is that public? I mean, do we publish that a traffic study has been done on this street and we know that, you know, this is what we found when we did it? Is that information available to the residents?
No, but when somebody calls on that area, we'll let them know that we just did a traffic study in your area, you know, 2 months ago or 6 months ago, and then, again, typically we end up redoing it. Because we don't have anything in the policy currently that says we're not going to redo it.
Julie?
Can I go back to step 3?
We're still on step 3.
I know. Can we go like back to talking about step 3 again? I'm okay with the 5 miles per hour. I think that's great. What do others think?
I'm fine with 5.
5.
Isn't that the unwritten rule that the police don't give you a ticket till you're at 6 or something?
It's totally.
I've heard that. I have never.
Words to live by, Becky.
No,
Words to live by.
I'm not gonna wood chip. Never had a ticket.
So are we good with step 3? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So step 4, I hear that we should just remove the 50+1 neighborhood votes.
Yeah.
Somehow in here, we need to build in though, because again, if we put down temporary speed humps and those are down for 6 months, that may not be the best engineering solution for that roadway. So we need to somehow gather the community, and engineering needs to look at what potential options are there, and we kind of need to, you know, put together some scenarios and cost analysis and say, here's what it is, very similar to what we did with Claude and Melody and 112th and Livingston and those. And again, Melody voted for the Connect Northglenn plan and no speed humps. Claude voted for speed humps. So somehow that's the community buy-in piece. Now, it doesn't have to be a number. We have 5 people already from the beginning. So, you know, we start with that, and then, you know, again, with the help of the communications director and the staff, we reach out and we try to put together some sort of community meeting or program and get that together.
Is this maybe somewhere that we could use telephone town halls? Because I appreciate the meetings, but I also know that like people's lives are crazy and some folks physically, for one reason or another, can't make a meeting. And so I wonder, like, if there's a way to solicit feedback that's multifaceted instead of just a physical appearance in a room. Like,
Yeah, I
like
think the
online
simple answer
survey
is
or-
yes, we could send out a flyer to promote the telephone town hall, do an online survey.
I mean, we also send out all kinds of like, vote by mail and tell us what sculpture you want in your backyard. Like, can we not do something like that as
Right,
well?
and you're exactly right. I mean, maybe that's something we can do as well. I mean, because the area that we're talking about could be, you know, anywhere from 100 homes to 200 homes. I mean, so when we have 38,000 residents, we're not talking about a significant number.
Well, in this outreach, can we include in there, if you're unable to attend, you know, these are the, you can check off 2 or 3.
Well, then maybe we just develop, maybe it's not a telephone town hall of such, maybe it is just a form that we say, you know, do you believe speeding is happening in your area? You know, maybe it's some sort of blanket type of thing, and then if you would like to call in or talk to somebody, then we provide a number, and maybe it happens that way, and we just, the area that's defined in the beginning, maybe that's the area of influence, and those are the addresses that we populate, and we send that information out to all those community residents in that area.
And I don't know that we necessarily have to figure it out tonight.
Right.
But I do think that there are ways that we can be more creative about like getting public input here and getting neighborhood buy-in. That's not just a petition.
She's working on her arms getting tired.
Marge is gonna wear her.
No. I wasn't interrupting Jenny. Meredith was, no, you go at me. No. Finish. Go, finish, Jenny. Are you okay? You're done? It was your turn. Sorry. We're all getting tired. I agree. I don't think that necessarily a community meeting or the call. Just wondering, could you just have like a standard, you know, nothing better than the yellow water bill tags, right? I mean, could you just have a standard door tag that is intended for that block and says your block is being considered for check this, and then you have until this date to contact, and then they put the date on it, and you give them however many flyers, door hangers for their neighborhood, and they put them on, and then you could technically create a form on the website and have like a form ID for that block, and they could submit it online or call, but just like put the door tag on, and if they don't respond, then they don't respond. But I mean, you can't force them to take an action, and I just think the average person, and I also just really think about staff time, like how many phone calls is that? And how many evenings is that for a staff person?
So what if we call it like neighborhood notification? It's just one bullet. We remove the first 2 bullets, and we have neighborhood notification, and then instead of meeting and temporary measures, we have neighborhood and temporary measures. And then we begin to backfill what that looks like, you know, but, you know, this would kind of be the policy or what we're put on the website or something if we revise the policy and then understand what those supporting steps are.
So I was just thinking about, and I don't want to take us off track, but I keep thinking about ideas in addition to, and how we might provide some services to our residents. One of the things, as you come around kind of from a major street into a pretty significant street, I don't know the terms, but it's pretty fast, and there's some little kids that live right on the corner. And I was done. My kids have outgrown the little construction yellow man, plastic guy, and I just took it over to their house and said, you know, try this, see how that feels for you. And I could tell, and then I followed up, and they can tell, and it's a super small thing, but kind of to your point of we can't put pumps on every street. We've got speeding on every street. We've got people turning too fast, not looking, sun glare issues. I mean, there's a ton of things that make this a concern in our city. Can we come up with other little things? Like, you know, if we bought those construction guys in bulk, I'm not saying we do that, but like if we did, and part of the traffic calming website said, you know, register here if you'd like a little construction man with a flag.
Those aren't allowed.
They're not, well, not allowed, not as an official thing, but, I mean, residents use them.
Right, but as the city, would we, from a liability standpoint, from the MUTCD, it's not an official.
Other options when our resources are limited. Because you've spoken a lot tonight about your team is really hardworking, and they are stretched thin, and they can't get all this done. And this is the third piece to your department. It's a heavy weight. And that's what we're hearing is, I don't have time to do all this. We've got to balance it. And yet it's still a need in our city. And so that's where I'm getting stuck is how can we have a brainstorming session where we come up with a bunch of ideas as opposed to just this one to support our residents. So it's not such a weight on your department and we're responding in some way to the need in the city. Because this one's huge. I mean, it is. When you talk to residents, it's the number one thing. I've stood on corners and they're like, see? Just watch. I'm glad you're standing here because there's another one. And then the most common thing they say is they did a traffic study and said there's nothing they can do. And it's a huge frustration for those residents. And so we have to come up with other things. I don't know.
Kind of our Meredith Stone dog action board. The same kind of concept, only no little yellow people. Just the neighborhood signing up like our old neighborhood watch. Well,
Yeah.
some neighborhoods still have it.
I mean, you're very limited on the things that you can, without knowing what the impact is on that street and really getting into the engineering of it. You know, maybe it is a bulb out, a change in configuration or something, but that's not something that we can do after we do an initial study to implement, to get something to calm them down or calm the area down for 6 months while you evaluate and look at the rest of the area. So when we look at the things that we can do temporarily, the things are speed humps, are the flashing signs, and traffic enforcement. Those are really the 3 easiest tools that we have. Now, there's a budget impact to all of those and a time constraint to all of those. But beyond those 3, from an engineering perspective, there really isn't another option without doing a further analysis on the section.
We can have a discussion about more creative options. I'll send a message to our managers listserv and see if any cities are doing something that's not captured here on this sheet in terms of the little men that neighbors could put out on the street. We'll talk about the ins and outs of the MUTCD and that sort of thing. So we'll bring something back. If it's signage, if it's yard signs, I don't know what it is, but we'll see if there's any cities out there doing something that gets more into what you're talking about, Councilmember Lady, and try to think more out of the box from our main tools that we have that we've talked about. Okay, so we were on step 4, so we've got some work to do there. Kent, do you want to go into step 5 and no further action? Describe those.
So no further action is just no further action. Again, we would do those things where we would put out the radar signs or, increase the, tell the chief that there's, some areas that they should look at and increase their traffic enforcement. And we would require that in the rest of the slides, it says 1 year. I would request that we not do another study in that same area for another year because the data just doesn't change year over year. So
That's 6 months.
I know, in the other slides it says 1 year, but this one says 6 months, so that's why I just wanted to make it 1 year.
How does council feel about that?
I'm good with the 1 year. I do want us to think though about the way that we phrase step 5 being less about no permanent, no additional action required, and more about like, if we're, so they don't qualify for speed humps or radar or whatever that is, but like, we are gonna tell the chief of police to like monitor the area. We are going to do X, Y, and Z, because I feel like the way it's phrased, like, it's like, sorry, it's not enough of a problem. It makes me feel like we're not being responsive, so if there's a better way to phrase it and talk about what we will do, I think that could be more positive.
Alright. We can work with Diana and figure out some better language.
And then on the step 5, the permanent resolution, again, this is that area where during that 6 months' time, we need to figure out, the evaluation, if a consultant is required to be hired and evaluate that area, what are some other options that can be done? Were the speed humps effective? Is that what the folks want? Do we make those speed humps permanent? What other additional traffic measures or traffic calming devices do we use? The tools that we have in these existing policy I think are the tools that, are very good. Again, it just goes from a level of cost to implement. And I think that's, kind of where it's at.
So we have some work to do. Would council like us to bring back at a future study session the work that we do, have additional discussion, and then we'll talk about bringing it forward for implementation? Okay.
I think that's a good plan.
Okay. Thank you.
I really like Marcy's idea, you have that down, right?
I believe I do, yes. Mhm. Yes.
I like that.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll update this flow chart of the proposed policy and capture the different pieces that were discussed, bring it back, get additional feedback, have some time to think about things, and
Was
then-
everybody comfortable with the 5, or we were at 12, we went to 5? Do we want to move in the middle?
Are you talking signatures or speed?
Are you talking about
Signatures or
speed?
No,
It's the same for both.
step 1.
Yeah, so we heard 5 households.
Right, I'm just asking if
Yes.
we're comfortable with
Okay.
5. Okay.
And then 5 miles per hour for speed.
Okay, do you have anything else? All right, we're adjourned, thank you.